CD 7. "31. Elsa had stepped into her crushed but clean knickers and pulled on her rumpled camisole. She'd hardly waited for the damp patches on the fabric to dry before she'd shrugged into her sponged-off day dress. She was comfortable enough, and the dress was not really smelly, but she knew it would have to be washed properly soon. She adjusted the bodice to sit comfortably without her chemise underneath, and was reasonably satisfied as she patted herself down. Oh, to be back in Robe, on the farm, and not bothered about what clothes I'm wearing. And that wasn't a good thought. She still had to learn more about what had happened here to poor George. Trouble was, she and Rosie seemed to have stepped into a mess, and all because of George. Now she had met the brothers Jones, there seemed a monumental task ahead. Glean information about George and find out what else might be left of his possessions, get back to Nebo Jones and his band of sorry followers in the bush camp, with information about Judah Jones, ensure somehow that the man with the knife was no danger to her, keep away from Ezekiel Jones. She'd have to make sure she could do all of that and get back to South Australia in time to vote, even if it did mean tackling Frank on a number of levels. Rosie, for one. Administering her father's property for another. Having to see that awful Pete Southey person. In the light of day, the task seemed monumental. Not nearly as monumental as some that others might be facing. Sal, for instance, the poor woman. How would Sal be faring? Elsa closed her eyes. She tested the toes on her bad foot. Pain seared through. Damn. How was she to get back, at least to Nebo Jones's camp, if her foot was still bad? She took the dusted-off roll of bandage and began to wind it over her foot, the support of it relieving some of the niggling pain. A nuisance, all in all. At least she had her boot on the other foot. How else was she going to be able to— "Elsa, it's a good thing you're dressed." Mrs. Hartman had thrust open the kitchen door and swept inside. "Mr. Jones, Ezekiel, will escort me to my house in order for me to change. He'll bring me straight back. You're not to worry." She seemed harried, flustered. Bright spots of colour stained her cheeks. Elsa stared over her shoulder as Ezekiel Jones filled the doorway. So no visit to George's resting place any time soon. "I'm not worried, Mrs. Hartman." She tucked in the edge of the bandage, knowing it wouldn't hold for long. "If you'd be so kind as to bring me a pin of some sort to fasten this off." She nodded at Ezekiel, who nodded back. "If you leave me instructions." "My children are very capable, Miss Goody, and will attend to any chores you might see fit. I'll have Gracie bring a pin for you. Now, should you find yourself at all uneasy if someone uninvited were to appear, there is a rifle in my room." "There's a house full of children to look after." "Yes, all right." "You know how to use a rifle?" he asked, his dark gaze on her. A slither of fear crept over Elsa. "I do." "Giff will bring it to you if there's a problem." He turned to Lily. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but the man in question is nuggety in his build, nondescript except for his front teeth." Mrs. Hartman nodded, glancing at Elsa. "They're capped in gold, quite distinct," she explained and clasped a hand on Elsa's shoulder. "We'll return very quickly. Well before mid-afternoon, you can be sure." Elsa looked up at Ezekiel Jones. "When you return, would you take me to my brother's grave?" "My dear, your foot needs rest," Mrs. Hartman said. "It does, but—" "I'll take you, Miss Goody," Ezekiel said. "I'll ask Giff to hitch up the cart to be ready for when we get back." He tipped his hat and then held out his hand, indicating Mrs. Hartman should leave ahead of him. He glanced at Elsa. "We'll have time before sundown when it's a little cooler," he said, and turned in the doorway before striding away. When the two were outside, Elsa heard Mrs. Hartman say, "I'm very worried about the other Mr. Jones. I should have made him some breakfast." Ezekiel Jones's voice drifted back. "Gracie can do that if he wants any." I don't think you need to be worried, and... Out of earshot, the rest of his assurance was lost to Elsa. Not long after she'd heard horses leaving, Gracie appeared in the kitchen room. She had a safety pin, about the size of Elsa's little finger. "I have this for your bandage, Miss Goody," she said, her soft voice sounding very grown up. She set about fixing it to the bandage. Elsa gazed down at the little head as Gracie bent over her task. "Thank you. It will help make it much easier for me to walk." "Oh no, you mustn't walk yet," Gracie said. "Uncle Judah is showing Gifford how to make crutches for you. My brother has already found long, sturdy sticks, and he's smoothing them off with his hunting knife. Jonty has to plait some rawhide, so they're very busy in Pa's room. That's where Uncle Jude is." "I see." Gracie patted the bandage gently. "It's all done." "What do you suppose I should do, then?" Elsa asked her. Gracie shrugged. In the silence, Elsa tested some weight on her foot. "You're right. Not ready to walk on yet. Not ready for a boot. At least she had one good foot." The girl's gaze was openly on her face. "Does it hurt?" "A bit." "What happened?" "Well, my horse, Pepin, he took a fright and stomped on my foot. I wasn't able to get away in time." Gracie considered that, then, "Where is Pepin?" "He's at your Uncle Nebo's camp. That's where my sister is too." Her eyes lit up. "You have a sister?" A pang of something hit Elsa deep inside. "Yes. Rosie is her name." A frown. "And where is your mam?" "She died." "Mine too." Gracie's hand snuck into Elsa's. "But we have our pa. Do you have a pa?" "Not anymore. He died too. Not many days passed. He was very worried about my brother, George. That's why we came." Elsa felt herself calm. "Did you meet my brother?" Gracie nodded. "He was sick when he was here. He talked a lot. Some I could understand, but not all. And he couldn't get off the bed or walk or anything." Elsa's breath caught. "Did you look after him?" Gracie shook her head. "Not really. Just to wash his face at times. It was very hot mostly. Pa looked after him, feeding him, giving him water. When Uncle Nebo brought him over from Uncle Jude's place, he was very bad." The girl squeezed Elsa's hand. "Then he died." Elsa panted a sob. "Thank you for looking after him until then." The little girl squeezed her hand again. "Do you know if he had anything with him, like a bag?" Elsa asked, waiting half a beat. "Or a box? A tin box?" Gracie frowned in thought, then shook her head. "I didn't see anything." Elsa sat back, withdrawing her hand from Gracie's. She'd have to wait for Ezekiel Jones to return and ask him, then thought better of it. Best to wait a bit longer. She sighed and dragged her fingers through her hair, well dried and now its usual unruly self. Gracie's eyes lit up again. "Can I do your hair, Miss Goody?" "Oh, well, if you'd like to. I suppose while we wait for the magical crutches. But it is a bit hard to handle, and there's so much of it." "We have a big hairbrush and I know how to do a plait. I do my own, you see. Pa taught me." And she turned her head for Elsa to admire the neat braid. Before Elsa could comment, Gracie fled. Elsa thought of Ezekiel Jones's big hands, those hard-knuckled, gnarly fingers of his, nimbly turning a little girl's tendrils into a neat plait. She couldn't imagine her own father would have done such a thing, and certainly not with her head of hair. With Rosie's, perhaps. Her hair was straight and easy to manage, usually tied back, neat and contained, but still, Elsa couldn't see her father attempting to fix her daughter's hair. Rosie would have had their mother's help. Elsa could recall Kitty, but not all that well. When George was alive, she could see glimpses of her mother in him, but otherwise there was very little to remember her by. Except for the locket. And George had taken the locket when he left the farm, but now she... "Here it is," Gracie said, rushing back into the kitchen and brandishing a beautiful brush, silver plate with a gold trim. A very old piece already, Elsa thought. Perhaps it had belonged to Ezekiel's wife, young Gracie's departed mother, or her grandmother. Standing behind Elsa, Gracie began pulling the brush firmly through the mop of hair. "It's very strong hair," she said. "It is," Elsa agreed, delighting in the luxury of having someone do her hair. "Now tell me what else you remember about my brother." There hadn't been a lot more to glean from Gracie. Once definitely established that any possessions of George's had not been secreted anywhere, there didn't seem a lot more to ask. Elsa sat back and let Gracie play with her hair. Jonty wandered in. "Is there bread and jam?" He brought with him a cloud of little flies. Gracie pointed to the loaf on the bench. He tore off a chunk and took a bite, then dipped another chunk in a pot of thick jam. "Gif says nearly done one stick," he said, his mouth full. "Oh, that's good," Elsa said. She might soon be able to hobble about unaided. She hadn't yet met Gif, but it seemed he was a capable lad. "Uncle Jude says you're George's, ma'am," Jonty said, still chewing. "He's lucky to have a ma'am." Elsa's heart lurched for him. "I'm his sister," she corrected softly. "Like Gracie is your sister, I'm George's sister." "George told me he had a ma'am," Jonty insisted. Elsa nodded. He did. The brush dragged a bit more, and she felt strong, nimble fingers divide hanks of her hair and begin to wind what would become a thick plait. "He told me stuff, and Gif." "Jonty," Grace chided. She whispered in Elsa's ear. "No one could make out what George was proper saying, miss." Elsa thought that might have been the case. Delirium made a person ramble. She would never truly learn George's last words, if there'd been any. Jonty was eye to eye with her. "Me and Gif know where Pa buried him." "Is it far from here?" Elsa asked. "Up that hill a bit," he said, tearing off another hunk of bread. "He's buried near our other ma'am, and our little brother." "Gracious me, more sorrow. Thank you, Jonty." "Jonty, go away," Gracie said, and the plait pulled a little tighter. "I'll take you there when we get you them sticks from Gif." Gracie was having trouble managing Elsa's thick locks. She tugged again. "You will not, Jonty Jones. Pa will take Miss Goody." A lanky boy appeared in the doorway. He had a crutch under his armpit, and he limped inside, as if testing it. "Uncle Jude wanted to see if this would suit you, miss," he said without looking at her. He handed over the crutch. "Are you Gif?" Elsa asked, taking it from him. "Gifford." The serious boy still had not made eye contact with her. "Gifford, I'm pleased to meet you," Elsa said. He was also his father's son, but there was a lot more of someone else in this boy. "Gif's pleased to meet you too, Miss Goody. He don't talk much." "Shut up, Jonty," Gifford muttered, and a bright red flush bloomed on his cheeks. Elsa spoke to Gracie. "Let me stand up now so I can test out this very handsome stick." "But I haven't finished your hair. Half of it's hanging out." "I'll only be a moment." Elsa slid the crutch under her arm, and using the hand grip, a tapered piece of timber wedged into a hole, neatly bored into the larger stick and bound by leather straps, she took a couple of hops. "It's very fine, Gifford. A rifle shot boomed into the air. Jonty shrieked and dived for Elsa's legs. She rocked against the stick and managed to keep her balance. Gracie stood stock still, but Gifford raced out the door. "It was Uncle Jude!" he yelled. Picking himself off the floor at Elsa's feet, Jonty stood for a moment, undecided. Elsa grabbed him by his shirt collar before he could think to run after his brother. "Gracie, take hold of Jonty and don't let him go. Come on, we have to go and see your Uncle Jude." Elsa handed Jonty over, and under Gracie's grip, the boy gave a little whimper of fear. "It's all right. We'll go to see him. Elsa said, hopping to get comfortable again on the new crutch. Outside the kitchen room, she couldn't hear any yelling. It was quiet. Strangely so. Not even the dogs were barking. Eerie. The rifle would have been fired for good reason, and that was enough to have her shake with apprehension. She shuffled forward with the 2 children close by. Gracie was clutching Jonty. "Can you be very quiet going inside, Jonty?" Elsa whispered as they got to the back door. He nodded. His eyes were wide, but there were no tears, no cries. "Gracie?" she asked. "We can creep along the hall. Pa has another rifle in that parlour room you were in. I can get that," Gracie whispered, taking Elsa's free hand. Elsa wasn't sure about that idea. As they stepped into the darkened house, she stopped and listened. Still no noise, only the loud thrum of her own heartbeat. Gracie's hand tightened. She squeezed back. How was she going to manage to walk quietly down the hallway on the crutch? She leaned heavily on it and tested her foot with her weight. Pain shot up her leg. No good. "Gracie," Elsa said softly as she bent down, "we need to crawl to that room. Jonty, you must be very quiet and do exactly as I say." He nodded. "Leave my stick here," she said, handing it to Gracie, and then slid down the wall to the floor. On all fours she crawled into the old parlour room, the children behind her. There was murmuring in the next room, but nothing like what she expected to hear. "I know where the bullets are," Jonty said, his little voice ragged as he tried to keep it low. "You're not supposed to know," Gracie growled at him. He tugged away from her and scrambled to the trunk where he picked out a box nestled inside. He took out 3 bullets and solemnly handed them to Elsa. She didn't want to think about a child handling ammunition, nor about having to load a rifle, but she slipped them into her dress pocket. If she had to use it, she would. "Where's the gun?" she asked Gracie. The girl darted over to where the commode had stood and pulled the rifle from behind. It was wrapped in rawhide and slid easily along the floor to Elsa. Unwrapping it, she felt the dust thick on her fingers. She couldn't use it even if she wanted to. The bolt was missing. Perhaps insurance against young Master Jonty's bravado. Besides, it was clear it hadn't been cleaned for some time. She rewrapped it and said, "We'll leave it here for the moment. We won't need it, I'm sure." Jonty looked crestfallen, and these bullets might be just the thing for Uncle Jude's gun. He gave her a grin. "Gracie, can you crawl along and see if Uncle Jude and Gifford are alone? You'll have to peek." Gracie's breath came in little puffs as she nodded and crept back into the hallway. Elsa followed on her hands and knees. "Jonty," she beckoned, then pressed a finger to her mouth to let him know he had to be very quiet. He scurried along beside her. Jude's door was open but an inch. Gracie put her eye to the crack and then looked back at Elsa. "No one else is in there," she said so quietly that Elsa thought she might have lip-read and not actually heard her. Gracie pushed the door a little wider. Elsa held her breath. There was Jude, the rifle at his shoulder and aimed outside, and Gifford, standing beside him, away from the window. Then Jude tried to shout, his breath failing him.
"Didn't realise it was you, young constable. Sorry for the warning shot,"
he called, his voice scratchy. He let his rifle slide to the floor. Elsa heard a reply, but couldn't make out the words. "Gracie," she whispered, "call out to Gifford. Tell him we're coming in." When he heard Gracie, Gifford turned. "Hurry up," he mouthed, waving his arm. Gracie pushed open the door and crawled in. Elsa followed closely behind, with Jonty on all fours beside her. "Are you all right, Mr. Jones?" Elsa asked quietly.
"Bloody troopers. Couldn't see him properly, so I fired off a shot. Probably get done for it."
He leaned against the wall, barely glanced her way.
"Damn thing's not loaded now."
He cocked his head at the weapon beside him on the floor. Elsa said to Gracie, The stick, please, and stay low." The young girl scrambled out of the room. "Mr. Jones, you must get back to bed. Your wound is bleeding." Gracie scampered back on her hands and knees, dragging the crutch behind her. Elsa grabbed it and hauled herself to her feet. "Gifford, please help your uncle."
Damn it.
Judah breathed. He started crawling, and Gifford was trying awkwardly to help his uncle get to the bed, fearing to put his arms around him.
"You come out here with your hands up, Jones!"
A man outside yelled. Elsa struggled to the window and peered out, careful to keep herself hidden. Certainly, 2 troopers were there, rifles aimed at the house. Gifford was still struggling with his uncle, not sure where to grab him, but finally Judah flopped onto the bed and rolled onto his back. Elsa glanced at Gracie. "Get some clean towels or something for your uncle to help stop the bleeding." "I'll get him!" Jonty yelled, and suddenly bobbed up, ready to run from the room. An explosion shattered the window, covering Elsa with shards of glass and timber. A hole burst in the wall behind them. Gracie shrieked and threw herself on the floor, clutching at Jonty, who'd howled in fright. "What are you doing?" Elsa screamed out the shattered window. "You just shot at a child!"
"What's that?"
The voice from outside sounded genuinely surprised.
"You hear that, Mr. Clark? It's a woman."
Gifford dived from the floor to the rifle. He grabbed a bullet from his pocket and scrambled to his knees, frantically trying to pull back the bolt. Outside, a trooper bellowed,
"Don't care if it's a woman. Probably one of them doxies from the hold-up that Watson reported."
He waited a beat.
"We know Nebo Jones is in there, so come out. Hands up."
Gifford still desperately tried to reload. Elsa dropped to the floor and, sweeping glass gingerly out of her way, shuffled on her knees to him. She couldn't escape broken glass from pricking her bandaged foot, but thankfully there were no shards. Still, little chips stung her toes as they found their mark. She slapped at Gifford's shaking hand as he tried to load the bullet. "Gifford, stop! Put the gun down!" Lips clamped, mouth in a firm line, he shook his head and tried to snatch it out of her way. "They'll shoot you, Gifford, if you aim the rifle at them." She heard the plea in her voice. He shook his head again, still fighting her.
"Giff."
Judah Jones was up on one elbow.
"Let it go, lad,"
he said tiredly.
"That's not the way. Don't be like your other bloody uncle, the one without a whistle between his ears to call for brains. You know better than that."
Gifford slumped, as if the air had gone out of him, and he pushed the rifle away, relinquishing it.
"Good boy. Now, crawl back over here."
Judah wheezed. Swiping broken glass out of his way, Gifford slunk over to the bed and sat with his back against it. Jude let a hand drape over one of his shoulders. The loud trooper roared,
"Get out here, now, Jones!"
Elsa peered out again and then back across the room. Gracie had Jonty in a stranglehold on the floor. "You two stay on the floor," she ordered. They both nodded silently, wide-eyed. She shouted, "Nebo Jones is not here. It's just Judah Jones and Ezekiel Jones's children and me."
"We know bloody Nebo's in there."
Elsa almost rolled her eyes. "You're wrong!" she yelled. "Judah Jones is in here injured after an attack on him, and he is with Ezekiel's children."
"He fired at us."
"He was defending children, defending himself."
"Not bloody likely."
"You are damn fools!" she shouted again, angry and frustrated by their stupidity. "And you'll be more than the laughingstock of the town when this gets out. Grown men shooting at children, at innocents." Peering out again, Elsa saw a cloud of dust behind the troopers. In the distance, but certainly on the home track. Perhaps it was Ezekiel riding back. Oh, that thought filled her with hope and with dread at the same time. Ezekiel Jones.
"Ain't taking no woman's nonsense. Nebo Jones, get out here."
From her vantage point, Elsa now saw 2 riders were bearing down the track. One whose clothes were billowing. That would be Mrs. Hartman. Dear God, Would they be killed if the troopers panicked? "I'm going to come out," Elsa called. "By the front door."
"Yeah, so Jones can get out the back way."
Elsa could see the rifle in one man's hand begin to lower. The other was aimed at the broken window. "So go around the back, you fool, as I come out the front," she retorted.
"You cheek woman."
"I'll give you cheek when I get to you face to face." Elsa shuffled back. "Mr. Jones, you'll stay low. Stay on your bed."
"I'll stay here."
Gifford cried out, his voice breaking.
"They'll kill him if they come in."
"They won't," Jonty whimpered. Gracie dragged him over to Gifford at Jude's bed and pressed the little lad against his brother. "Your father is coming," Elsa said, a whisper so low she wasn't sure they could hear. "I could see him. The troopers haven't heard him yet."
"They'll shoot him."
Giff's eyes were wide. "Not while I'm standing out the front." Elsa turned back to the window. "I'm coming out now," she shouted. "If you shoot me, you'll have to shoot every one of us, every witness. And shooting children is not an act of self-defense, is it?" She dropped to the floor again and slid under the shattered window, dragging the crutch with her. Pricks of pain smarted once again where glass nicked her toes. They heard a trooper say,
"I ain't shooting no kids, Mr. Kilby." "No one's shooting kids, fool," the loudmouth growled. "You girly," he yelled. "No weapons now."
Edging up the wall, she could clearly see it was Ezekiel galloping towards the house, Mrs. Hartman now left well behind. His reins flicked wildly from one side of his horse to the other, his hat long gone and the locks of his hair streaming behind him. In that glimpse, Elsa had never seen anything more wonderful or terrifying in her life. He was charging towards the troopers. "Gracie, you stay with the boys to help your uncle," Elsa whispered. "The troopers won't hurt us. Go on now." The girl stared at her, wide-eyed and silent. Elsa needed to keep the troopers' attention from Ezekiel. She slowly pulled open the door, leaned on the crutch, and squinted into the bright daylight. Her foot hurt, her toes stung. She squeezed her eyes shut a moment and waited for that split-second click of a barrel. Nothing. She opened her eyes. Ezekiel was still too far away. Shuffling onto the veranda in full view of the troopers, she called out, "It's just me. There are 3 children inside and an invalid man." A push behind her and a small hand gripped her skirt. "I'm here too. Jonty and Giff have got Uncle Jude, so I'm helping you." Shock thundered in Elsa's chest. She half turned. "No, Gracie, go back."
"Drop it now. I can see what you're doing."
The trooper roared, and the rifle came up to his eye again. Elsa's breath caught. Desperate to keep Gracie out of sight, she froze. Ezekiel was only a few hundred yards from them, but still so very far away, even if he was coming fast. Just a bit more time. A shot rang out, booming loud in her ears. Behind her, Gracie screamed and dropped. Dust flew up from the boards as Elsa crumpled on the veranda. 32.
"Damn and blast that trooper."
Sure and all, there was worse cursing he could yell into the afternoon air, but naught to be done for it. He'd only end up swallowing flies as he rode along. He wasn't going to directly cross the law, so no amount of yelling about it would make any difference. He kicked his horse into a gallop. Pete Southey knew he was close to Panola, and as soon as he got there, he'd get to the first pub. He hoped he'd make it before that cloud burst overhead. Still, he had good daylight, and although hungry, he'd slake his thirst with a rum, and then fix his rumbling stomach. Bugger it. Over 3 days since leaving the Goody farm, and he still got his back up knowing that the trooper had accused him of thievery. There he was, minding his own business. He'd been shoveling horse shit from the broken-down stable, then he'd gone to tidy up the hut. Well, to check again for that will, or for other things of value. Should have known better, there was nothing. And the trooper had burst in.
"What do you think you're doing, Southey?" He must have snuck up on foot. I didn't hear no horse. And there I was, checking the back of that hutch thing in the hut.
Pete had spun around, guilty as buggery, and stared into the face of a sergeant who'd visited the town from time to time. The man's handlebar moustache looked too big for him, his youthful looks belying bright, keen, squinty eyes that burned and seemed to nail Pete to the floor.
I'm caretaking. Bollocks! You're looking for something to pinch, that's clear.
Pete shook his head.
Frank said he left a will, and he said the Smithy said you might be out here snooping around. Bet it wasn't the old boy Smithy. Bet it was that shit of a kid of his.
The great moustache moved as more of the thunderous voice came out from under it.
Mr. Putney just buried, and you just had to race out here and rummage around where you got no right to be. Yeah, and by the look on your face, the Smithy was right.
The trooper thumbed over his shoulder.
Get out. Look, Miss Putney doesn't know Frank's gone to God. I was looking for something that might give me an idea where to go look for her, maybe find her and tell her. You know as well as I do Mrs. Putney was seen by Mr. Milton on the Penola Road.
The frown was deep and the moustache had stopped moving. Pete looked about him.
Tighten up, I was, in case she came back. Them sisters will need a decent place to live, and it ain't decent now. Look at it. Don't give me that. It's true, and Miss Goody, that's Miss Elsa, I asked her to marry me. I'm looking after her interests. Well, I don't know Miss Goody too well, but that doesn't sound right to me.
Pete had straightened up.
I did ask her. Still lying through me teeth. Surely to Christ he'll give up. I meant it don't sound right she'd want anything to do with you.
The trooper put his hand on his pistol. Pete stepped back, hands in front of him.
All right. Place is almost too far gone anyways. But when them girls do come back, it needs to be decent, at least for Miss Elsa. I hear you've been in the bakery too.
Pete's heart hammered. Shit, he was going to do him for robbery or something.
Had to pay for Frank's funeral, Miss Putney gone and all. None of your damn business who pays for what. Empty your pockets.
His hand was still on his gun. Pete let out a great sigh. He dug out a $5 and 3 one-pound coins.
Ain't any of it yours, is it?
The sergeant asked.
He'll pay for repairs. Look, they'll need fences fixed here, and the yards rebuilt, the well cleared. Tell you what.
The constable said and wandered further back into the hut.
Keep the coins and give me the $5 to take back.
He held out his hand for it.
Maybe you need to go find them sisters and escort them home. Heard they were going to tell relatives about their pa's passing.
Pete wondered what was being offered to him. Handlebar still had his hand out, so he gave the note to him. It disappeared into a pocket.
And better you go right now on that horse of yours.
The fella went on, looking around.
What? To Penola? Or wherever you have to go. Because if I see you back here without those women, or here you haven't even left here, I'll put you in leg irons.
Those flashing eyes and the grim mouth under that plank of a moustache surely meant he was all business. Pete had sidled past him in the doorway. When he got outside, there was another trooper, mounted and waiting. Pete blew out a silent breath. Even if he had thought of clobbering old Mustachio here, he wouldn't have got very far. Lucky he hadn't jobbed him one, after all. Now, nearing Penola, the coins jingled in his pocket. There'd be an ale or two, maybe a rum in one of the coins, and then he'd think about his next move. He didn't much like the idea of going further than Penola, but more so didn't like the idea of going back without the Goody women. That trooper might not be happy. Pete could always just keep going, not bother coming back. But if he got Miss Elsa back to the farm, and Miss Putney, they'd both be grateful to him. He'd have a good chance of making something of himself. He could almost smell a brew as the first dwelling of the town came into view. Riding on the thought of it, he headed for what he reckoned was the pub on the corner. Couldn't miss it. Blokes standing out the front of a brick block of a place, pannikins and shot glasses in hand. One of them staggering over to lean against a hitching rail. There were a few kids hanging around. Looked like they'd been out rabbiting. One lad still had his haul over his shoulders. Might even be rabbit stew on the menu. That would suit him well. Standing outside in the late afternoon, the air had turned chilly, but he'd had a rum. Not a good one, but good enough, and its warmth swept through him. He had company, the men and the rabbitin' kids. The tall lad was trying to sell the last of his catch, and one of the fellas told him that 2 women had travelled here a few days back.
Publican says they were ma and daughter. Could have been sisters, but why say otherwise?
The fella said, and Pete shrugged.
Not toffee looking, these 2, but the older one was in better nick than the other. Her clothes and all like a townie. The younger one weren't no townie. Had a good grip of the reins. Handled the horse and cart all right. Could have been them. Sounded like them. I'll ask the publican. He won't tell you. Only troopers want to know that sort of information. Right.
Pete backed away from that idea. Didn't want to start anything to bring any more attention to himself.
True enough.
Another fella agreed, and blew out a plume of pipe smoke.
Don't get too many folk round here, don't stay a while. You said they had people here.
Pete hadn't got any names of relatives. He hadn't thought of doing that.
They were coming to pass along sad news. Goody was the family name in Robe, and Miss Kitty, the old Goody lady, gone now. Her people were from around here, but I don't know their name. The ladies were going on to Narracourt from here, I've been told. And why are you looking for 'em?
No harm in saying.
The missus, well, her husband dropped dead just a day or so after she'd gone. She got be told there's business of hers need doing back in Robe.
Hats tipped in reverence, nods all around. Tobacco smoke flumed, ale and rum slurped. Gobs of spit landed on the dirt road. The lad with the rabbit carcasses over his shoulders spoke up.
They wasn't on the road to Narracourt. Them ladies was on the Casterton Road when we saw 'em.
33. Nebo looked over at Rosie.
She'd have found Zeke for sure by now.
He tossed the remains of his tea into the small campfire. The sun overhead wasn't as warm as it had been the day before, but intermittent cloud cover brought humidity. Sheens of perspiration had appeared on them both, and he wiped a hand down his neck. He stared at her, wondering if she'd regretted last night. He hoped not. But what did he know of ladies? She was real keen. It had been her idea. Shit. Maybe he shouldn't have. But what fella wouldn't have? He corrected himself. A fella who knew better. Wait a minute. Hadn't he said as much? That he knew better, and that he'd caught her, and... But then she got herself all breathless and urgent, and then somehow they were lying down beside each other, and she was sidling closer to him, talking of not wasting any more time. Next thing, a few kisses. She was taking his hand, lifting her skirt. She's very capable, is Elsa, Rosie replied, and sipped from her cup. Those directions were good. She wouldn't have got lost. He sat on a log close to where she sat. Rosie nodded. He rubbed his hands on his pants. Maybe he shouldn't have done it with her, long after dark last night, long after he could hear Glenn and Tilly's snores chorusing, after he could no longer hear Fred and Alice's murmurs. He'd heard nothing from Wally and Sal. They'd all moved their camps a little further away to let them cry in peace. Poor bastard. Wall, he didn't know what to do. Nebo had been lying on his swag, hands behind his head, stargazing but not seeing stars, when Rosie had crept over to him, saying she needed to be close after the dead babe and all, and poor Sal. When he'd woken just before dawn, she was back under her cot and had appeared to be asleep. More tea? He asked her now. She shook her head. No. He leaned towards her, keeping his voice low. Rosie, I meant what I said last night. I'm very much taken with you.
and I don't want to think we made a mistake."
"Was no mistake, Mr. Jones," she said, and her face coloured red as if a bloom had opened on her cheeks. That gladdened him.
"I'm happy you think that. I also think you could call me Nebo."
There was silence between them for a few moments. Then she spoke. "It was no mistake because I wanted to know. I wanted to feel." She stopped again, glanced at him, and shifted her shoulders. "Oh, I was being selfish, that's all. And because of what I wanted, I let Elsa go by herself." Rosie checked where the others were, as if to be sure they wouldn't hear her. "And then with Elsa gone, and the way you were looking at me," she said, glancing at him again, I wanted to see if things would be different, other than what I'd known before." She stopped, which was good. He was having trouble trying to take it all in. There were a lot of words. She went on. "To be with my husband in the marital bed was always a duty to be endured." Her face got even redder. He didn't think she'd been enduring duty last night. When she'd first told him that she was married, Nebo hadn't been overly concerned. A smart man would have guessed she'd been married. She was of an age. She could have been a widow. He'd listened to her reasons for leaving this Frank fella. It had all come out in a jumbled rush, and his head hurt trying to keep up. It irked him that Frank had not appreciated a good wife. Nebo had been looking for a woman to make his wife, and if Rosie was to be that woman, he would take her as she was, married to another or not, and be good to her. He looked over to Glenn and Tilly. She was laughing in his arms, happy, carefree, married to someone else, not Glenn. It didn't matter to them. Why should it matter to him? "So, you were under no obligation to me." She twisted her ring finger, but there was no ring on it, only a pale mark where one might have been.
"I'd like to be."
Sitting beside her on the sturdy bench seat that Fred and Alice had put together, he bumped her shoulder very slightly.
"We've just taken a shortcut in the courtship, moved to a more interesting stage."
He noted the beet red flush was still in her cheeks. Looking away, she said, "You are a man without prospects, and I am now well and truly a fallen woman." He thought for a moment. He wanted to hear her sigh again, like she had last night. He wanted to hear her voice in his ear, urging him harder and deeper.
"Nobody but you and I need know any of our private business. Ever."
"I would need to survive."
"I'll look after you. Besides, I do have prospects. I can go see my brothers. Work for them. They each have small farms."
He hadn't told her yet why he hadn't already done so. He hadn't said that he was a petty thief, a layabout, jealous of one brother and ignored by the other. Well, today was the day he would change his ways. He could do it. He hadn't held up the coach. He hadn't done that last job, even though it had been the intention. His little band was breaking up, so he had the opportunity now to try to make good. People would talk if we lived together. Again, he took his time before he spoke.
"Nebo Jones has been gone from high society for years."
A ghost of a smile was on that mouth of hers. "Would your family accept me?" He laid a hand over hers, yet when she made no reaction, he took it away.
"I'm the only one who needs to accept you."
"I can't have children," she blurted. He shrugged.
"Zeke has children. The way I feel right now, doesn't matter to me that you can't have any."
How? Why he felt so strongly, he didn't know. He'd had women before. Women he'd taken when they offered. Women he'd let go. Or who'd let him go. None had affected him like this woman had, and it had been real fast. She reached for his hand and her fingers squeezed his. "It's very quick, this courtship," she whispered.
"We were in a hurry,"
he said, matching her whisper. The thought of her lush breast in his hand, her taut nipple in his mouth, and the warmth and wet between her legs. the surprised little sigh that escaped her as he slipped in there to stroke and push and touch and own. "It was never like that for me before," she said and ducked her head. "Never." She took a deep sigh. "And I'm so lewd to be discussing these things with a man, in the daylight, in the open air."
"In that case, I'm impatient for the night."
She shook her head, a worried laugh escaping. "Will we get along, do you think? I've been a wife before and I don't—"
"But you've not had a husband like me before."
Rosie looked down at their hands. "Elsa and I, we came looking for your brother so that we could learn more about what happened to our George. And then we would have our father's will read. Though now that I've left my husband, I don't know what that would mean for me. Or for Elsa." She glanced at him. Nebo shut up. Was she asking him to take on the sister as well? He moved on the seat, uncomfortable.
"Oh, I can't have—"
"She's all I've got to rely on," Rosie went on.
"Didn't seem to matter when you let her go yesterday."
Nebo felt a prickle of shame. He didn't want Rosie to lose her sister, but nor did he want to look after the sister. "Until we find what else George had with him." Nebo frowned at that.
"The locket? A few buttons?"
"Nothing else?" Rosie was very intent.
"Not that I saw. Zeke has everything I found."
Then he remembered a look that passed between the sisters yesterday.
"What else is there?"
"I'm trusting you, so you better tell me the truth." "It was a tin of sovereigns, 30 sovereigns, perhaps more." Rosie stared at him.
"Shit, 30 sovereigns."
"There was no tin. If we find that tin, it's half Elsa's and half mine. That way Elsa could live independently, to start anyway. We could live without the farm, and I could live without anything from my old life."
"What farm?"
"The farm we had back near Robe. It would be in my father's will, and Elsa has it with her. So as soon as we find the tin, we can hire a solicitor and find out who administers. If I'm not with my husband any longer, it won't matter, will it?" He shook his head slowly.
30 sovereigns.
He let that swirl about in his head. He needed a plan. The petty thief was at work. He looked at Rosie, couldn't read her. No, he couldn't let this layabout Nebo sneak back in. He squeezed Rosie's hand again.
"It won't matter. Don't you worry,"
he said, although it didn't sound like his voice.
"We'll find a way around things."
He wanted to believe his words. He did. But unease settled in his gut. Oily. Something akin to fear. He didn't know what he'd just agreed to. Even to his own ears, it had sounded like it had come from someone else. From someone who was a grown-up. 34. Zeke had heard the shot. His heart banged against his ribs as he left Mrs. Hartman in his wake. Sweet Christ, who were they shooting at? His kids? His brother? Elsa? Then he saw her drop on the veranda. They've shot her, the bastards. But where was his bloody rifle? In his room at the house with Jude. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Poor Milo was galloping as fast as he could. Zeke was low over his neck, urging the horse with his heels. He turned and yelled to Mrs. Hartman, "Stay well back!" Shit, if he hadn't spent so much time waiting for her at her house while she dithered about. He was closing in. He saw the troopers wheel about on their mounts and straighten up when they saw him. One of them dropped his rifle, threw his hands in the air. The other one was having trouble controlling his horse. Milo skidded in alongside them, bumped the horse under the trooper whose arms were still over his head. In a rage, Zeke reached over and hauled him out of the saddle by the shirt front, then slung him to the ground. Only a lad he was, and scared to death by the look of him. He turned Milo about for the other.
"It weren't us! It weren't us!"
the older trooper screeched.
"We didn't fire."
He threw his rifle to the dirt.
Liar.
Zeke stepped onto Milo's back and lunged at the other man. He ripped him out of the saddle. The man's foot caught in the stirrup, twisted. He squealed. dangling upside down as Zeke tumbled past. Scrambling back on his feet, Zeke bunched his hands in the man's coat.
"You fucking bastards! It weren't us! Swear to God!"
The man screamed, his face red.
"Me foot! Me foot!"
Zeke didn't let go until he checked the veranda and saw Gracie helping Elsa to her feet, a crutch of some sort tucked under her arm. "We're all right, Pa!" Gracie yelled. He wrenched the man's foot out of the stirrup and threw him off, left him in a writhing heap. He slapped the trooper's horse hard, and it took no time stomping off.
"Stop your bloody squealing,"
he shouted.
"What the fuck do you think you were doing?"
He spun around and descended on the boy. The young fella scampered out of reach.
"We were looking for Nebo,"
he said, his eyes large and snot running over his lip.
"He'd done a hold-up. We knew Jude was banged up and we reckoned Nebo would come here, so we'd catch him here." "You reckon wrong, you stupid bastard."
Zeke spun back to the older man and pointed.
"If I find one splinter has harmed my family,"
he said, teeth bared as he dropped to his haunches. His face was close to the other man's, his rage thrumming.
"I'll hunt you down, and Nebo Jones will be the least of your worries."
He stood, grabbed the trooper up, and shoved him.
"So get on your way. Get off my land."
The trooper stumbled. He waved the younger one over, and together they got him steady on his feet.
"I busted me ankle. Not likely. Get lost before I give you something else to whine about."
Zeke bounded up the veranda steps, anger leaching out of him, and fear replacing it. He hauled Gracie into his arms, and she clung to him, her wiry arms around his neck. He rocked her, his heart thudding. He was suddenly wild and lost, light-headed. "I'm all right, Pa," she said into his shoulder. "They did shoot once, after Uncle Jude shot his gun. But that last shot was Gif. He fired the rifle from inside." Mrs. Hartman was helping Elsa to stand as she struggled up against the wall. Zeke's rage had been so blinding he hadn't seen the older woman gallop in behind him. Gif leapt out the door and ran full-bodied into him. Jonty followed, his little face bright red. He fell into the huddle, and Zeke rocked all three, his arms tight around them. Mrs. Hartman steadied Elsa, then she marched off the veranda. She bore down on the younger trooper as he helped the other man limp towards his horse. "When I see your mother, Tommy Broadbent, there'll be hell to pay. Shooting on women and children. What on earth possessed you? Bailing up a young family and acting like a hooligan. Miss Hartman, I swear I don't you snivel at me." She wagged a finger under his nose. "Get back to that farm of yours and do some hard work for a change." She snapped, her voice cracking. "Don't be running around with the likes of this one." She thumbed towards the man he was half carrying. "Get me horse, boy," the older trooper growled. "Out of my way, missus." Mrs. Hartman glared at him. "You irresponsible great dolt, Ernest Kilby. You pathetic, galumphing fool. Your senior officer will hear about this." She spun on her heels and steamed towards the veranda. "And you children, you're not to repeat those bad words of your father's." Zeke stifled a laugh in Gracie's hair. He watched the troopers snatch their rifles from the ground, clamber onto their mounts and ride off. He looked over and saw Jude's face in the window. "Jesus, brother," Jude said. "What the hell have we got in these women here?" His kids were untouched, unharmed. They were fine. Mrs. Hartman was fine. In fact, in fine metal. Zeke still had a smile, despite his fright. His estimation of Mrs. Hartman had risen considerably. As for Gif, he'd frightened himself, so no need to go crook at him, though when the boy had picked up the rifle again, he'd snatched it from the lad's shaking grip. Zeke would put more time into teaching Gif how to better handle the Martini Henry rifle and when to use it. Mrs. Hartman was attending to the other two children and Jude. She was soothing Jonty's wails, but Gracie was her calm little self. Jude's protests were loudest of all, especially when she changed his dressing. His stitches had held together, but there was a small tear that had bled. She wasn't sounding overly patient when he whinged about it. Miss Goody had shuffled, white-faced and wincing, along the wall of the hallway until he and Gracie got back to help her into the old parlour room. Despite spots of blood on her face and forearm where glass and splinters had flown at her, she seemed unhurt. When they angled her to sit on the cot, Gracie knelt and brushed debris off her sore foot and picked out a couple of tiny pieces of the shattered window. Nothing another bandage wouldn't fix after a wash with lye soap. She'd impressed him somewhat, but he had an issue about Gracie and he couldn't leave it unsaid.
"Miss Goody,"
Zeke said. He was standing in the doorway of the room into which he'd always stuffed unwanted or unused bits and pieces, things he thought he might use one day and never had, things he thought his kids might enjoy. The cluttered space seemed different to him now, as if an extra presence had changed its purpose. He would clean it out.
"Thank you for all your help."
He took a breath.
"Though, I'd have much preferred my daughter hadn't been with you when you confronted an armed trooper."
Gracie was very brave out there, Elsa said, still pale in the face. She rubbed her foot as she sat on the edge of the cot, then pulled her hem over it and tucked it back out of sight.
"She shouldn't have been there at all,"
he said, hearing the censure in his tone. There was a hesitation, a slight frown. No, she shouldn't have. She glanced away. Thankfully, that idiot trooper wasn't stupid enough to shoot at a woman and a child.
"Even so, he might have."
He watched her take in a silent, deep breath at his rebuke. Clearly, she'd done what she thought best at the time, but it had been reckless behaviour to allow a child out there in that situation. "Quite right. I apologise. I never meant for your daughter to be in harm's way." She gave him a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. She looked away and took another deep breath. "In the morning, I'll be able to ride to my brother's grave by myself if you direct me, and then I'll depart your property afterwards. My brother's resting place, and finding the locket, were the sole reasons for my coming here, and to thank you, of course." Giff pushed into the room from behind his father. "Miss Goody, I've finished the other stick," he said, a broad smile breaking his usually solemn features. He brandished the crutch. "Uncle Jude said it's a fine job." Now her smile was genuine, and her eyes lit up as Giff thrust the stick at her. She struggled onto her feet to test both crutches. "It is indeed a fine job. Thank you, Gifford." "Call me Giff," he said expansively. Elsa Goody didn't miss a beat. "It will do me very well, Giff," she said, and took a couple of awkward paces, dodging furniture. "I'm grateful to you." His son beamed with pleasure, not something Zeke had seen for a long time. The boy nodded at her and ducked around his father out the door. Elsa manoeuvred her way back to the cot. "Perhaps someone would strap these to my horse tomorrow, so I might use them again after I leave. They'll be very handy." She let them drop to the floor, side by side, and resumed her seat. Using both hands, she pushed back her long, thick, wavy hair, which looked to be only partly secured. It hung more than halfway down her back in a heavy, dense drop. "I think I would like to take a nap now, Mr. Jones. I seem to be out of breath." Amazing. He had been dismissed. Swiftly, she'd put the boot on the other foot.
"I'll ask Mrs. Hartman to look in on you,"
he said. She glanced at him. "No need," she said politely.
"Nevertheless,"
he answered, and not waiting for a protest, if any, reached over to pull the door shut behind him as he left. Her gaze, bright, intense, and bold, stayed with him long into the afternoon and the night.
"I'll have to go with her, Jude,"
Zeke said, his voice low. In his hand was a tin cup with a tot of rum in it. He gave his brother a sidelong glance as they sat on the veranda.
"Back to Nebo's camp. I can't let her go by herself. She was very lucky to make it to us the other night without any trouble."
Jude nodded, eyes wide, mouth pursed. He lifted his own cup.
Yeah, no. You can't let her go by herself.
The children were abed after their bath, overseen by Mrs. Hartman, who had also returned Elsa's cleaned and dried chemise. After saying good night, then goodbye to Elsa, and wishing her a safe journey, she had just gratefully taken her leave to collapse onto Gracie's bed once more. Miss Goody had emerged for dinner, but had also retired for the evening. She wanted to be up and gone by dawn, she'd said, so declared she needed an early night. But before she left for her room, and as his kids chattered away to her, telling her of their school, their chores, their animals, she'd looked at Zeke briefly. "Do you have any storybooks, Mr. Jones?" He'd watched Jonty slip off his seat at the table to stand by her chair. The boy stared up at her before slipping his hand in hers.
No, I don't,
he said. "You must get one so you can read to your children before bed." She turned away, missed seeing his mouth agape, and was giving Jonty her attention. He'd climbed on her knee. Despite Zeke's lukewarm objection to that, she wrapped her arms around the boy and began to relate a tale of 3 bears and a little girl. Jonty, who didn't know what a bear was, kept interrupting, and so the tale went on for a while. Her audience had been enraptured. Finishing the story amid demands for more, Elsa was readying to leave the table when Gracie offered to fix her hair for the night. "Not tonight," she'd told his daughter, "but if you're awake very early, I would certainly appreciate some help then." Gracie had smiled her delight. Zeke's heart gladdened at that, but his own delight had been diminished by the fact that Miss Goody would not make eye contact with him. Most likely she was still upset that he'd chipped her about having Gracie on the veranda when those fool troopers were aiming guns at her. Zeke shook out of his thoughts and swirled the liquid in his cup before addressing Jude.
"Seems Nebo gave her exact directions. If we follow it in reverse, it should take us back to him and his camp. If he doesn't want to come here, at least I can warn him to keep out of sight."
He took a swallow of his rum.
"I don't like the idea of leaving you with only the kids."
He looked across, straight-faced.
"And Mrs. Hartman. Very funny. She's a fine woman, and we can be friends. I shouldn't meddle with that."
Jude shot him a glance, then stared at his hands.
"Besides,"
Jude said,
"you've seen her when she gets mad. A bloke wouldn't stand a chance. A bloke might become a happy man again."
Judah moved in his chair as if easing a sore spot. The stitches in his side would be nipping at him.
"Happy,"
Jude said, shaking his head.
"Happy has just ripped away from you. I have to wonder how and why I ever got there in the first place. Now they're all dead."
He glanced at Zeke.
"Not sure I want happy to happen again. It marks you for doom."
He tapped a fist on the table and looked away. Zeke saw the shake in Jude's conviction.
"Is that so? I reckon you do want happy again. I reckon you know what you're missing. And there's no better woman than that Mrs. Hartman. She's set on you in any case. You're just too thick to see it." "I do see it, but I just got nothing. Not even all of my own mind with this grief over my girls."
He rubbed his face.
"It never leaves you. It takes its place, Jude."
Jude shifted and looked uncomfortable. Maybe after a challenge his thoughts didn't sit easy.
"I'm a broken-down fella who runs from his ghosts. Maybe time to stop running. Maybe. I've thought about it."
Jude tossed back his rum.
"And maybe for you too. You listening to yourself?"
He pointed a finger at Zeke.
"I know you got grief, but I've seen a light in your eye now that I haven't seen for a while. Reckon that Miss Goody has fired you up."
Zeke said nothing, but Jude went on.
If she takes your eye, Zeke, well, a man should grab the good while he can. You know how quick things can turn bad.
He threw his hands in the air.
I can hear myself think. We're talking the same thing.
Zeke let his thoughts run again. Elsa Goody. The way her face lit up when she talked to his kids, or when she'd glanced his way, not realizing he'd been looking at her. When that glance softened, before she remembered she was mad at him. Too soon for her. Too soon to be with her. Jude pounced.
Ha! I see it. Not to mention the flaming red face she gets when you look at her. Lucky you two weren't sitting together before. The place would have combusted. Bollocks!
Zeke sputtered and cleared his throat.
She wants to kill me. I ticked her off because she had Gracie out there on the veranda when those troopers were carrying on.
Jude gave a laugh.
Little brother, your daughter just marched on out there after Miss Goody directly told her not to.
Shit.
Should have known.
Gracie could be pig-headed.
Shit.
Zeke coughed again.
We were talking about you just now. You have a think about Mrs. Hartman some more. You know she tends your girls' resting places. It means something to her.
Jude nodded.
Figured it was her. Looks a right special place now. All those flowers growing. Don't pass her up.
Jude cupped his pannikin.
Might be right. I reckon you've been thinking about her anyway, haven't you? Might have.
Jude went quiet. Zeke stared out into the darkened night. His mind wandered. The moon would be a full one, and its glow on the horizon bright. He swatted at insects. Wouldn't be long before they'd have to head inside or risk being eaten alive. At least all the lamps were out inside. They needn't attract any moths or other flying midges. Mosquitoes were another issue. The season was changing, though. There might be some mercy in that. Jude let out a long breath.
What do you reckon about this Curtis Goody fella?
Whoever he is,
he's going to murder and maim until he finds something. You know he thinks the dead lad left something of value.
Jude shook his head.
But he didn't. We found nothing at home. Nebo brought you the only things the boy had, didn't he?
Zeke hesitated, nodded.
But who knows how Nebo thinks these days? Yeah, Zeke, but Nebo, he's not a killer. He's a thief. Ugh, he's just a nuisance. He's always been lost. He didn't shoot the boy. You know it, and I know it. Miss Elsa wants to visit the gravesite tomorrow.
Jude downed the last of his rum.
And a good thing you'll accompany her there too.
This is the end of CD 7. The book continues on CD 8. CD 8. $35. By the time Elsa had made it to the cookhouse, a new dawn was streaking golden shafts of light over the horizon. She hoped she hadn't wakened the whole household as she'd swung herself along on the crutches down the short hallway. Outside, she got to the privy, then headed in to stir up the coals for some tea. All very awkward, but at least she was mobile. She wondered about trying to saddle up Salty and get on her way alone, but it was only a fleeting thought. Attempting that with her foot out of action would just be silly. It was struggle enough getting through her ablutions. After a hot and restless night, sleep had eventually come, although her thoughts, insistent and repetitive, vexed her. She didn't want an attraction to any man, not now, and especially not a man who thought her reckless with his children. She'd kept going over and over the situation with the trooper and the shock of finding Gracie behind her on the veranda. She checked the water level in the kettle and then sat back to try and get her hair into some sort of order. Gracie hadn't appeared yet, and Elsa didn't want to have to wait if the girl was going to take her time. No sooner had she untangled the first ribbon of hair than the kitchen door was opened.
"Good morning."
Ezekiel Jones stood in the doorway, shirt open a little and haphazardly tucked in at the waist, trousers buttoned, socks on his feet. His cheeks and chin had the darkened shadows of day-old bristles. His dark hair framed a serious face, and his eyebrows had a quizzical twist. But his eyes... His gaze made her heart race, just like it had before sleep finally came last night, thanks to him. A breathlessness was with her again. "Morning?" she croaked, or thought she did, her voice whisked away. Gracie darted inside, pushed around her father, and ran behind Elsa's chair. "I'll do it!" she cried, and plunged her hands into Elsa's hair. "I brought the brush. It's in my pinny pocket. Good morning, Miss Goody," she said, and tucked her face around to give Elsa a toothy grin. "Morning, Gracie," Elsa managed. "I've the kettle on for tea." Then she said to Ezekiel, "Then I'd like to be on my way." He stepped inside the kitchen and headed for the stove, reaching up for the tea caddy on the mantel. "Oh," Gracie said, standing behind her and sounding annoyed, her hands tangling in Elsa's hair. "It's fallen out of what I did yesterday. I'll have to start all over again." She didn't sound that disappointed. After a moment, Elsa felt the brush and Gracie began long downward strokes, tugging through the thick waves. "Gracie, perhaps I could do it myself. I'm sure you'd have chores to do." "Not yet, Miss Goody. Have to have our tea first," she answered, working steadily. Elsa winced a little at Gracie's fervour. She glanced at Ezekiel. "I'm ready to leave as soon as Gracie is done. Jonty told me that George is buried a little way up the hill, so I should be able to find it. I'll only need help to pack the horse and to mount." She had to stop her voice shaking. She took a breath. "I also need whatever else you found of my brother's." He'd murmured again. He drew down 3 tin cups. "Oh, Miss Goody, this is a mess," Gracie said, matter-of-fact, still pulling through Elsa's hair with the big brush. Looking up, Elsa caught Ezekiel's eye. He seemed amused by his daughter's claim, but content to have her continue. Elsa felt heat rise in her chest again. Her restless sleep had done nothing for what was left of Gracie's previous attempt at a plait. Elsa should have rewound her own hair for the night, but it was the last thing on her mind. Time and time again, thoughts of Ezekiel Jones had hovered over all rational thought. Despite his growling about Gracie being with her on the veranda under the trooper's threat, the thrum of his presence glowed inside her, and those wicked thrills that made her squirm in secret delight had descended on her and hadn't let up. She had rarely been taken by a good-looking face or a knowing smile, but she recognized the feelings clearly enough. The same type when Henry Benson looked at her. Not that he had caused her this much pleasant discomfort. Her response to Ezekiel Jones was more the look of the man, not being looked at by the man. This was anticipation of seeing him, of waiting for the hum and throb in her belly as she heard his voice, or for the sweet warmth to tingle between her legs as she watched him move. And how her heart had gladdened when he'd crushed his little girl to him yesterday, and how he'd kissed his boys before their bed. How, at one point, she swore his gaze had glinted when she'd spoken to him. How she'd fled to bed before she started to stammer in conversation and began to flutter. How girlish! How ridiculous! I'm sensible Elsa. I'm capable farm girl Elsa. I'm suffragist Elsa. I'm not a debutante, not a schoolgirl. She had a job to do, and that was to get whatever belongings of George's were here and get back to Rosie, who was still with that other Jones brother in his poor camp, to find a solicitor, to take ownership of, or run from, the farm. She would think about a livelihood and her survival after she'd made it back to Robe, or elsewhere in South Australia, to vote. What would come after that, she didn't know. But she would not stay here a moment longer and be subjected to her fancy whims about a man with a devilish, dark gleam in his eye. She felt her face bloom now at the thought, and even though she was staring at his broad and straight back as he made tea, surely when he turned, he'd be able to read it for what it was. The sooner she was out of his way, the better, and that made her heart pound harder. She let her breath go. She hadn't realised she'd been holding it.
"Your tea, Miss Goody,"
he said and slid a pannikin in front of her. "Thank you." Elsa, not able to look at him, just took up the cup and blew in it to cool down the brew. Gracie was still resolutely tugging the brush. He leaned back on the bench under the window. Elsa could only see his long, solid legs, crossed at the ankles, the flap of his partly untucked shirt hanging over his trousers, the belt at his waist.
"I've tinned milk somewhere,"
he said. "Up by the candles, Pa," Gracie said, dragging doggedly. "I take it black, all the same," Elsa said. "We haven't had a cow for milking for some years. I'm quite used to taking my tea without milk." She glanced at him. His gaze was on her, steady, unmoving. Her heart thumped, and she looked away, trying to concentrate on the fine-looking mantle over the squat iron cooker. "Did you do the milking, Miss Goody?" Gracie rested a moment, letting the long drape of hair fall down Elsa's back. "And the butter churning, and the shepherding, when we had sheep, and the skinning of the rabbits. Then I had to set the traps, too, and—" She stopped. She was running away with herself, her speech rapid and breathless. Ridiculous.
"So, a true farmer's daughter,"
Ezekiel said. "For the most part, I was the farmer," she said, noticing he'd folded his arms and was studying her. She looked at her hands, the palms stained with the land, the backs of them weathered, her nails short, discoloured. She dropped them to her lap, out of sight. For heaven's sake, why be conscious of that now?
"Although you don't sound like a farmer, I believe you,"
he said, his tone light. "I was," she said, annoyed that perhaps he was making fun of her. "My father had been ill for some time, and George was really not that interested in the farm. He was always off exploring, he'd say. I'd always worked the land. Someone had to. It would be too easy to rattle on, to have a lovely conversation when really she needed to get going. She needed to drink some tea. She blew some more and ventured a couple of sips, nearly cool enough.
"I believe it. I can see you're strong and natural in your disposition, as if used to hard physical work."
"Oh, am I not ladylike in my appearance?" Hackles rose. He was nothing if not forthright. She looked down at her dress, spot-cleaned, old and faded. Seeing it anew, she felt an unfamiliar dismay creep into her. Gracie resumed a while, then sighed, pocketed the brush, and tried to begin the plait. "Oh dear," she said. "I've brushed and brushed so much, now it's too slippery for my hands," she said. "Pa, you'll have to do it like you do it for me." Startled, Elsa shook her head. "Oh, that's not—"
"Gracie, why don't you go and see if everyone else is up? I need to talk to Miss Goody for a while."
"Pa does hair real good, Miss Goody," Gracie said, smiling broadly. "Here's the brush and the tie." She put them on the table and took off for the house. Elsa put her hands to her hair. "Really, there's no need for you to do it. I can manage. Gracie just seemed to want to help so much that I—"
"No trouble."
He pushed off the bench, his gaze on her.
"First, I now know that Gracie took it upon herself to stand by you on the veranda. I must offer you an apology."
Under the intense scrutiny, Elsa felt the rush of colour again. No point hanging on to it. Accepted.
"Good. I can get on with the plait."
She protested again. "It will be, unseemly for you." She stopped short. Good God, Elsa, what is this ladylike rubbish? Unseemly. The whole jaunt since leaving the farm was unseemly. More tea. More tea. She sipped again, swallowed, but it was too hot.
"Not my household. I'm both father and mother to my children, so I've learned to do a few things that a woman would do, like my daughter's hair. Besides, there's no one to see me making a plait, so it's no bother to me," he said. "My brothers would think it a great lark."
"Perhaps Mrs. Hartman would do it for me."
"The children are not to wake her. She's been through enough in the last couple of days."
He paused.
"As have we all."
She felt him take up the weight of her hair in his hands as he stood behind her. Shivers flared across her chest.
"Gracie and I learned to do hers together,"
he said.
"I'm sure I could be of some use here, as long as you don't mind simple and tidy."
Elsa was transfixed. No man had touched her hair, ever. Those hands of his, the ones she'd stared at and wondered about, were in her hair. Strangely captivated by that, it made her a little lightheaded. It was foreign, exciting, good, too good. The warm tingle on her scalp, the glowing rush of sensation down both of her arms, her belly tightened. As he separated 3 thick strands to make the plait, his fingers brushed her neck. Innocuous, a nothing touch, but her nipples squeezed and her secret place tightened. Every so often he tugged a little harder as he braided. How good that felt, and his fingers worked more magic. Never had she believed there were sensations like this. The things he aroused in her. He stopped, and so did her breathing. She felt the plait being examined.
Now,
he said, and resumed his handiwork.
"I'll be accompanying you to Nebo's camp."
Her heart gave a jolt of a different sort. What? "That's not necessary either." She half turned towards him.
"I think it is."
He took her head and gently turned her back.
"I'll either convince Nebo to come here and wait for this crook to be caught, or convince Nebo to stay where he is until I let him know it's safe. Either way, I'll have to warn him. And even then, sometimes my brother doesn't know what's good for him."
"I can warn him without—"
"And besides, it's not safe for you to be travelling by yourself with that fella out there."
"Surely in broad daylight there'll be no issue." She took a good swallow of tea, pushed aside the memory of bushrangers bailing up a stagecoach in broad daylight. Minor point. He tugged a little, turned the plait again. When he continued, his fingers grazed between her shoulder blades, warm and light. She felt it even through the fabric of her dress. He worked steadily, his knuckles skimming her back lightly as the plait grew. Acutely aware of him, she felt every minute scrape, every tiny stroke. Even imagined a linger of a touch when perhaps there was none. She squeezed her eyes shut. How was she going to sit still or breathe until he'd finished? When had this sensible farm girl, the woman she was, become such a dithery, twittery wreck?
"I'll be coming with you,"
he said quietly. The fingers continued, plaiting and tugging.
"We'll ride for the camp after you've visited the graveside. Your sister will be worried for you."
The dithers and twitters continued. "But what about the safety of your children?"
"Judah's here, and Mrs. Hartman."
Then he barked a laugh.
"Though I suspect she'd defend the place all on her own."
His fingers worked deftly. A touch of his hand tingled the hollow down her spine. Why did it feel like it was just for her? Another shiver scooted along her arms and into her chest. Oh, don't be so silly, Elsa. Every twist of his hands working the plait was only confident ownership of a simple task, nothing more. But even sure he would be feeling nothing like she was feeling, it was much more than simple. It was as if he'd stroked her, as if she was taking illicit pleasure in something she couldn't name. She hummed inside and held the secret of his touch close. "And if your directions are as clear as you say," he went on, "I'll be back here by dark, and you'll be with your sister, preparing for home." Sharply brought out of her dreamy haze, she knew there was nothing to say to that. Anyway, his hands were nearing her lower back and showing no signs of stopping, and nor did she want him to. Thank God he is oblivious to my nonsense. This can't be proper. Her face burned all over again at that. First of all, a man fixing her hair, a man she barely knows, and touching her accidentally, of course, not by design, not the way Pete Southey had poured her, but touching her. The feather-light scrapes and brushes of his fingertips and knuckles teasing their path down her back. Nearly finished. His breath was on her neck as he bent forward. "Hand me the tie, would you?" Groping on the table for the piece of calico ribbon, she held it up to him as he handed her the end of the long plait. She watched as he tied it off with the strip of fabric, winding the long, wide ribbon around the end of her hair. He knotted it and swung it behind her, letting it drop softly on her back. "All done," he said. Her breath came back, but her heartbeat continued to gallop. "Thank you." "Pleasure," he said, and his gaze held hers for a moment. Then he smiled, and his face transformed. "Oh, I knew you'd have finished it, Pa," Gracie said, a little disappointed as she burst back inside. She ran to Elsa and took the heavy plait in her hand. "It's very fine, Miss Goody." Admiring her father's handiwork, she said, "One day I'll be able to do your hair just as good." "One day?" Elsa only said, "Oh," and took up her cup of tea. She put a hand on the plait, felt it for herself, but it left her bereft. The hypnotic feeling of his hands on her hair had vanished, leaving nothing but a merciless need to have them in her hair again. Ezekiel said, "Gracie, tell the boys I want them to hitch Milo to Mrs. Hartman's cart, saddle Salty and tie him on side." Gracie stood for a moment, eyeing her patient father. Then she turned her attention to Elsa. "You will come back again, won't you, Miss Goody, after you've found Uncle Nebo?" "I'm sure she will in due course," Ezekiel answered. "Oh, that would be so grand." Gracie's small, strong hands squeezed Elsa's before she shot off again. "I don't think I will be back," Elsa said to him, a frown deepening. That wasn't fair to tell her that. He acknowledged that and shrugged a little. "She's my daughter. I know her well. I'll explain to her when the time is right." He peered into her near-empty cup and took it from her to the washbowl. "She's enjoyed your being here." "All the more reason not to get—" Elsa floundered for her words. "Get her hopes up? What hopes, Elsa Goody?" "She understands that things change, that they come and go." He hesitated and gave her a rueful smile. "Disappointment can come later." Then he brightened a little. "It's just nice for now, to see her happy and smiling." He picked up her crutches and held them out. "After you." Elsa found it easier to move today and, swinging along, was glad that she'd soon be on her way and nearing the end of this part of the journey. She wasn't looking any further forward, just wanted to be away from him and leaving behind her bewildering feelings for him and his family. The day was cooler, though she could feel her face and neck dampen with the effort on the crutches. Spying the cart already harnessed, she cheered up and headed for it. They'd soon be underway. Just as she got there, Jonty flew off the veranda and rushed into her, clutching her about the legs and burying his screwed-up face in her skirt. "Don't go! Don't go!" He wailed so loudly the dogs started up their barking. Staggering a little, she juggled the crutches, dropping one to hug the boy. She steadied and stood holding him as his snivels and sobs muffled into hers. His sturdy little body was shaking with his distress. "Stay with me!" he howled, and his head came up as he pleaded tearfully with her. Then he buried it again, sobbing hard. Her heart squeezed, and her arm tightened about him. She looked across as Gif stood nearby, shock etched on his face, staring at his little brother. When he glanced at her, he looked worried, as if he needed to say something, as if he, too, didn't want her to go. Gracie was standing alongside him, her eyes wide, her mouth open. Ezekiel was rooted to the spot.
"Jonty."
Elsa held the boy, rubbed his wiry back, bent a little more, trying to soothe him. She murmured, "Jonty, I have to go to my brother. You want me to do that, don't you?" "No, he went away, too." His head came up, and the twisted little lips and the reddened eyes flooded with tears rocked her heart. She held on to him, wanting to cry with him. For George. Ezekiel stepped closer.
"Jonty."
"I want her, Mama," Jonty wept, and his grip tightened on her dress. "Be my Mama." Elsa shot a look at Ezekiel, mortified that the boy called on her for something she couldn't give, that he clung so desperately to her. Ezekiel barely glanced at her.
"Jonty, come along, boy."
Despite his father's encouragement, Jonty didn't let go until Ezekiel gently picked him up under the arms and took him from Elsa. He set him down, held him by one shoulder, and squatted so he was eye to eye. Then he brushed the tears from Jonty's face with large, gentle hands. He cupped the boy's head, his gaze roving over him, as if he was drawing in the wonder of his little son. His other hand swept tenderly over the messy thatch of Jonty's hair, back and forth, until the boy was comforted. Elsa swallowed the cry that came to her lips. That such open feeling was on display from a big, sun-browned man, whose eyes glistened as his calloused hands held his bonny child, who listened attentively to the plaintive sobs. It nearly brought her undone. She had never seen such a thing, not from her father, for her, or for any of her siblings. She had been right in her estimation of Ezekiel Jones. Here was a man who'd known deep sorrow himself, and the depthless grief of his family, felt emotion keenly and expressed it with dignity and courage. And that opened the tightly kept, aged hollow inside her and swept it away. As warmth and light flooded in, she held fast for fear that a cry would still escape. Jonty's blubbers withdrew to hiccups, and he bit his quivering lip, his wet eyes blinking at his father.
"We must be brave, lad,"
Ezekiel said quietly, his dark eyes creased as he smiled a little, his whiskered jaw sharply contrasted to the smooth cheeks of his son.
"Miss Elsa has to go."
The boy's bottom lip came out again. "I don't want to be brave."
"I know, but it's best to try."
Ezekiel cupped his boy's head again.
"Gif."
Gif shot forward and slipped his hand around Jonty's.
"Stay with Jonty now, until we're gone. Then take him with you and let the dogs off for a while."
Gif nodded. Jonty's bottom lip remained jutted forward. "Bring her back," he demanded, man to man. Ezekiel stood and smoothed the boy's hair again. It seemed to Elsa, his jaw tight, his chin to his chest, that he couldn't answer. She was grateful that Gracie had gone to gather her belongings. The girl held Elsa's other boot, and it dangled from her hand by the laces. "I'll put this with your satchel, Miss Goody," she'd said quietly over Junty's gulping, and had marched past her brothers to the cart, dropping the boot over the side. Then she marched back to them, and only lifted a hand to wave goodbye. They left to the rousing chorus of 3 excited dogs. As they passed the back shed, Ezekiel roared at them to shut up, and except for one last yap, silence descended. Elsa was grateful also to be sitting alongside Ezekiel in the driver's seat, and not mounted on Salty, trying to keep her sore foot in the stirrup, or worse, stuck in the back of the cart alongside all Mrs. Hartman's garden implements like some hefty sack of mulch. Conversation was patchy. Elsa didn't broach Jonty's reaction. His children were not her affair after all, but she couldn't help feeling for them. They'd all touched her heart. "Are those working dogs?" she asked when the barks had stopped.
"Kelpies."
"I haven't heard of that breed," Elsa said.
"Been around a little while now. Smartest dog there is. One of them, Busy, belongs to Jude."
Then he gave her a smile.
"Best farm workers."
Then, looking dead ahead again, and clicking the reins, he said,
"Weather might hold."
"Yes." She glanced at the sky, cloudy but not yet ready to rain. It seemed a companionable silence for the most part after that. Only a short time later, he slowed the cart. She took a deep breath and adjusted her hat, pulling it a little lower over her face as the timber crosses appeared, signalling the gravesite. Her stomach lurched. A day of high emotion. Ezekiel hadn't said much more since leaving his house, and she wondered again how Jonty's cries might have affected him. Still, visiting this place would have a somber effect on anyone. Towering over the site was a massive gum tree, majestic, wide and strong, clearly one that had stood sentinel here for a long time. It would have seen drought and fire. Parts of its thick, broad trunk were blackened. Howling wind and driving rain, for sure. It stood proud and alone on its grassy knoll, ravaged by the elements, and above the pale golden plains that flattened wide around it. She'd watched it on the horizon. Now, as they drew closer, she took deep and silent breaths, else she feared the tears would well and plop on her cheeks, that her face would screw up, that her control would evaporate and she'd bawl her lungs out. For this would be the tree Ezekiel had written of.
"He lies by a great eucalypt." "I'll help you down. Tend the other graves till you're ready to leave,"
Ezekiel said and pulled up. He let Milo's reins dangle as he climbed out of the driver's seat and strode around to her side, where he reached into the back of the cart for her crutches. He leaned them on the cart and turned to her, holding out a hand. To keep from falling into a weepy heap at the sight of the graves, to stop herself from breaking, she got onto the edge of the seat and stood carefully on her good foot. But she couldn't think for the life of her how to get down from the cart. He reached up. Big hands spread across her waist and lifted her down as if it were long practiced. She settled on one foot, her hands slipping from his shoulders to hang onto his arms. No thoughts rushed through her, but her belly filled with wild swoops at the warmth of him. When she steadied, he handed her the crutches and she put them in place.
"All set,"
he said. He took a pace or two with her, a hand hovering at her elbow until she found her rhythm. Then he tipped his hat.
"I'll just be over there."
He pointed at the other 2 crosses. She could not trust her voice to speak, only nodded her thanks. She looked at the wooden cross at the head of George's grave, vaguely aware of Ezekiel's footfalls as he walked away over leaf litter and twigs. A hum of blowflies passed her, a buzz of one close to her face. She tried to blow it away, reached up to swipe at it, unbalanced a little. Steadied. The cross was simple. As she neared, she could see that someone, most probably Ezekiel, had etched her brother's name and his date of death on it. Barely a month ago. She'd seemed to have lost track of time. Suddenly her throat scraped raw with her voice, as if the pain of grief was articulate, not put to words, yet not denied expression. The sound of it must have reached Ezekiel.
"You all right?"
he called. Still struggling to be quiet, she turned and nodded briefly, turned back and hung stricken over the crutches. Without them, she would have sunk to the dirt and been unable to help herself upright again. "George! George!" The voice was hers, but her father's echoed over it. That brought more pain. Here, now, her throat tight, her chest demanding air, Elsa knew her grief opened the wound she'd tried to stitch closed far too early. She couldn't see George in her mind. She couldn't hear him, but she felt his presence. She stared down at the mound of dirt, at the cheeky sprouts of weeds dotting it, at the odd pebbles that were strewn across the pattered down earth, at the simple etching of his name in the wood. She sank to her knees then, the pain too much, the crutches falling from her grip. Ezekiel was by her side, on his haunches, his voice soft. "Let me." He took her hand, held her, let her claw her way back to her feet. He tucked a crutch under her arm, retrieved the other for her, rested his hand over hers. He slipped away peacefully. There were no last words, no last-minute wishes. She felt the rasp of calloused skin and the hard, warm fingers of his hand. Elsa gulped noisy breaths as much because of his words about George as for the touch of his hand. There were no last memories coming from him, no nothing. He just slipped away. Ezekiel had risen with her, steadied her. He did talk when Nebo first brought him home. About you and your sister. Mostly you. And the rest was delirium, I would say. Although Gracie said he talked of your mother. When she looked at him, Ezekiel nodded. Cried for her. As a boy in deep pain would. Gift might have heard a word or something, he's never said. But there was only one thing I heard that was clear. Not sure how coherent it was. He said, "We'll save the farm." And then, "It's in the dirt." But after that, he wasn't really conscious again. Sniffing, wiping her nose on the back of her hand, Elsa said, "He must have been feverish. The farm is nothing but dirt. Barren now." She sighed, and a little more composed said, "Please, continue to tend to your wife and your son's graves. I'm all right." His voice cracked. "Who told you it was my son?" "Jonty. He told me where I could find George, beside his mother and his brother. He said the graves were close." "Young Jonty amazes me," Ezekiel said. He pinched his nostrils. "Buried there as my last son. Born and then died not 2 days later. Healthy, it seemed at first. Not long or hard labour for my wife." He shook his head as if bewildered still. "And your wife? What did she die of?" "An aneurysm of the brain," I said. "Not long after the baby." Emotion, that was not her right to have, surged inside her. Blinking hard, she shifted her weight, easing her good leg. She swung on the crutches to stand in front of the graves, the larger mound for his wife, whose cross bore her name, Maisie Jones, her date of birth and date of death. She had only been 28. The smaller cross was bare. "What's your son's name?" she cried. "His cross is not marked." She took a breath, astonished to be so rude, so judging. For a moment he seemed caught off guard.
I had to bury him without.
He took a breath.
Maisie couldn't bear to name him.
Elsa watched as he stared at the little mound. Then he put the fingers of both hands to his forehead as if he had a terrible pain. She knew that feeling, that taut band, the dry ache in the temples that thudded without ease. Grief. And did you name him? She asked, surprised she'd even spoken the words. He looked at her. His dark eyes bloodshot and bleary, as if he struggled to contain a deep reaction. He lifted his head a moment.
His saviour. Maisie never knew that I named him. She just couldn't bear talking about it.
Will you write his name on his cross? Elsa couldn't bear thinking the little grave would remain unmarked. Raising his eyebrows, he looked at the grave anew.
I will,
he said. In her mind's eye, Elsa could see Sal rocking her dead babe. She hoped she'd named the little girl. She hoped they'd buried her in a good place. She hoped. She just wanted to get back to her sister. Hug her tight. There were so many things she didn't know. Rosie, who so desperately wanted a child, would have bought one from a baby farmer. Elsa herself, who had never thought of her own babies, only those of the animals she'd tended. Was that a strange thing? Thought of Sal, whose dead infant had been held tight to her chest, not allowing anyone else to take the little body. And now, this man's wife, giving birth and having the baby die only days later, the suffering she would have endured. I don't think your wife would mind now that you name him, Elsa said. How dare she say such a thing? She could barely comprehend the anguish. All very well to watch a cow grieve, or to watch another woman grieve, but never knowing, never experiencing that loss herself. How could she speak for another? And what of a man's grieving? Men who think they shouldn't show emotion. Wally had seemed so stoic, even gruff. But was he only paralysed by grief? Not just charged by society to never show it? It must have been gut-wrenching, destroying. She could not begin to.
Not now, she wouldn't.
Ezekiel agreed. He rubbed his nose, sniffed loudly, pulled his hat lower over his eyes and turned away from the graves.
But back then, she minded. Maisie hadn't wanted him.
36. Sometime in the night, Nebo said,
Are you not, with all intents and purposes, now my wife?
Rosie rolled towards him, snug at his side, and sighed. Mr. Jones, she started. She still called him that. I'm delighted with your attention, and your sentiment, and cannot be happier. She pressed a kiss to his chest and flattened her hand on it, fingers tweaking the hair. It echoed how Nebo felt, but he didn't have exactly those words. It felt good to hear it from her all the same. He hadn't been sure she always looked as happy as she claimed, and she did go on a bit too much, too quick. There were a lot of words come out of her. Some he heard, some he just nodded as if he'd heard, as if he was listening. He was staring up at the dark, starry sky, his arm tight around her shoulder, happy as a pig, when she said, But I won't allow my path to be hindered by the heady nights that have been incessant and prolonged. His chest expanded. Incessant and prolonged. That was him. He'd done that. What a bloke was he? Shit, he wanted to puff out his chest even more and strut around the camp. She craved it now. He could tell. She tapped his chest, then allowed her fingers to drift under the blanket. So, I'll keep my own counsel and nothing will detour me from that. He frowned, whatever that meant. He'd had to take a moment here and there over the last couple of days and nights to sort all her words. She had a lot of words, and to catch what she might have meant, to keep up with her. He reckoned he'd got the gist of it now. He smirked to himself. Incessant. Prolonged. They couldn't marry, he knew that, but they'd live together, wouldn't they? That would make her his wife. It was a given. A contentment came over him. The stars looked brighter. The future looked brighter. He had a woman of his own. She pushed away then, and rolled onto her back, and when he smoothed a hand over her luscious breasts, they seemed to float. He wanted to bury his face in them and slide inside her. Frank, she said, and he imagined her lip was curling by the tone of her voice. Oh God, how his very name draws me down to the depths. But I must face facts. I don't want to be Mrs. Putney. Not for a moment longer. But I am. She had lain, gleefully and wantonly were her words earlier, with him, a man not her husband. And delight had opened for her, she'd said. The reality is, Mr. Jones, she said, her fingers reaching over to swirl lightly on his belly. Unless I can prove cruelty beyond the law. And she laughed then. And no one can actually see this particular cruelty. I am married to Frank until death. It didn't faze Nebo. He just didn't care. He had his hand on a full and firm breast, and when he tweaked the nipple, he heard her soft gasp. Then he put his hand on her bare thigh and slipped it higher to brush her damp pubic hair. You are most distracting, she said, and rubbed against him, diverting him from her well-endowed chest. And it's no duty to undergo whatsoever. Her fingers crept around his hard cock. He was just happiness itself with the fact that she couldn't seem to get enough of him. And he couldn't get enough of her. When he was in her, gliding back and forth and making her hum and quiver. He couldn't wait. He needed her now. Gripping her sneaky hand, he tugged it away before she ruined him, lifted himself on top of her, and slid between her open legs. You look right happy, Mrs. Jones, Nebo said to her. They were sitting at his campfire the next morning. He bumped Rosie's shoulder as he poked at the campfire coals with a stick. A chill lingered in the air. The seasons were changing, and summer was receding to autumn. Shouldn't call me that, Mr. Jones, Rosie chided, though she didn't seem unhappy about it. That little smile, that little lift in her eyes. She tugged his jacket around her. You just call yourself Mrs. Jones, he said, and that can be that. When I'm already Mrs. Putney, I told you last night. Well, just forget that Putney bit, he answered. From here on in, no one else need know. He waved a hand around the campsite. And no one here cares. You've left him, haven't you, my girl? She'd nodded, and still went on about the same thing. He stopped listening. Wished she'd stop going on about it. He had stated his needs, and they were simple. He was hers. She was his. The rest would be fun. No need to go on. And on. He threw the stick into the fire and interrupted her. If I had a decent tent, we would be there now, making you more my Mrs. Jones. He grabbed her hand, traced a finger down her palm and raised it to his lips. He felt a tremor pulse through her. Rosie's voice wavered. It's not only delight you're after, is it, Mr. Jones? It's that, and more, he said. You're my kind, Rosie. We're like you and me. She laid her head on his shoulder. What will we do? What will you do? No job, no prospects. He smoothed a hand over her hair and said,
I have prospects, I said that. My brothers have small holdings, too small to make life easy. If they work the blocks together, make them worthwhile, I'll have work.
Rosie pulled back. And you don't have a block?
I wouldn't live in the bush if I had a block. I was the layabout son, so my parents put up a bit each for my brothers.
He shrugged.
Pa had a little money stashed working the goldfields at Bendigo in the 50s. They bought some land, carved out a farm. They were careful, those two.
He snorted.
I was to have worked the farm, but the rabbit plague of 66 ruined them before I was old enough to help, and Zeke was even younger than me, so it was hard times.
He flicked a few twigs into the fire.
Jude was maybe 8. He could go work for someone to bring in some money, but things were too far gone on our farm by then, so it got sold. We had to camp for a few years, but they hung on to a tiny stash of coins for that rainy day. It was the only way they could get ahead, so we lived on those rabbits. I never want to see another pot of rabbit stew again in my life.
He stayed silent a while. Rosie stopped talking too. His life didn't seem so good, if he looked back. Mostly his doing, he knew. He knew it, clear as anything. The other two had picked themselves up, but not him. He'd gone wild. Seemed easier. Believed he was owed something. It rankled, still. He picked up a pebble and hurled it to the coals. Hard to look at yourself. Unruly. Angry. No local girl had taken him as a serious contender for marriage. He had nothing. Was a no-hoper without a crust to his name. The old farm had gone long prior, and his parents dead these last 10 years. His brothers had made their own way. Jude had already been walking out with Anne in the early 80s. Maisie had chosen Zeke, the bastard, and not once had she looked back at Nebo, who'd been after her first. Didn't matter now. Maisie was dead. He should stop looking back.
Stay with me, Rosie, he said urgently. We'd be good together, you and me.
She glanced at him. I could, I suppose. She picked at her hands like she was nervous or something. I mean, it's only been days. She continued. I know we're grown-up people, but it's so forward and unusual. Still,
we start from here then.
He stopped her going on too much, smiled and held out his hand. Rosie slipped into his. All right. His heart thundered, and a happy gallop of pulses shot through him. Nothing else mattered now. He was going to make good. He'd go cap in hand, but serious, to his brothers and start a life on the land again. It wasn't like he was useless. He could do anything. He knew it. Wally and Sal emerged from behind the canvas drop. The lifeless little bundle in Sal's arms.
We're ready now,
Wally said, and gathered Sal close, an arm around her shoulders.
We'll put this little one to rest.
A thud landed in Nebo's chest. What was that? Grief for his mate? Must be. He jumped to his feet. Rosie stood, her slim hand squeezing his as she pressed alongside him. When he glanced at her, he saw tears running down her cheeks. 37. Lily watched the cart, the extra horse tied behind, bob along the track until it took the bend and disappeared from her sight. Shading her eyes from the glare striking through the dense, rolling clouds, she hoped they'd get to wherever they were going without the heavens opening and drenching them. Oh well. At least Miss Goody would be all right with Ezekiel escorting her back to her sister. She wondered whatever would become of the sister left behind in Nebo's camp. Could be a scandal to that, but she knew there were other women there if the poor girl needed to be sheltered. Such a strange predicament for everyone. The dead boy and his sisters searching for answers. And poor Jude, being stabbed like that. Her heart warmed, then cooled almost as soon. He had rejected her.
Mrs. Hartman, I thank you for your company, but I'm a solitary man.
He faltered then, and she thought he'd perhaps been too embarrassed to go on, so she'd gone about other business in a hurry. Couldn't even remember what she'd said. Well, for heaven's sakes, she hadn't proposed. It wasn't that bad. Still, she should be resigned and let it go. No point believing there'd be some magical turnaround from him. The man had made himself clear. The rejection was, after all, her own fault, wearing her heart on her sleeve. What sensible woman ever did that? Her mood dropped even further. She sighed long and hard. Whatever would her daughter think of it? "Mama, you are just too old for that sort of thing," she'd most likely say. Lily could just imagine Loretta tisk-tisking. If the mail had arrived in Melbourne on time today, Loretta would be doing just that as she read Lily's letter, as she read of her mother's gushing, oh, the mortification now, over the possibility of Judah Jones in her life. Still, it didn't matter what Loretta knew or thought she knew. No one else was privy to how Lily felt. And Judah Jones had simply jumped to conclusions. She hadn't declared herself, God forbid, so no harm done, except for a little bruising of her ego. She was of an age where her dignity came before all else. No one knew her private thoughts, and so her ego would survive this. She sat on the end of Gracie's bed and looked around. The children's room was small, with hardly any furniture except the necessary, and no playthings whatsoever. Perhaps Gracie might like Loretta's old rocking horse, and surely there'd be something discarded by Edward and Oliver at her house that she could bring over for Gifford and Jonty. Oh, to have family around again. Well, young family. The older her children got, the more distant they seemed. Perhaps that was her fault. And Stan's. Perhaps they'd given their children such an idea of independence and maturity that they hadn't wanted to revisit the past that belonged outside of the busy city. And really, she thought to herself a little exasperated, what on earth was she doing here, all by herself? Certainly if the only man in the district who interested her was not interested, then what was the point? Widows were hardly inundated with invitations for afternoon teas or lunches. Widows, except those who were in their dotage, and she was most certainly not, were given a wide berth, especially if they had no family. It had even been hinted, and outright suggested when she came to think of it, that she should go to Melbourne and take up lodgings with her daughter. She shuddered, and didn't study that too much. Loretta, at 16, had not been able to wait to governess in the city, and Lily had barely seen her in the 3 years since. Her daughter's letters were more than a little standoffish these days, hardly conducive to Lily suggesting a visit to the city. She cast her glance around the little room again, straightened Giff's bed linens, and grabbed a small pair of discarded long johns that had seen better days. Probably knew when Giff wore them, passed down to Gracie before she wore dresses, and now to Jonty. Oh no, was Jonty not wearing any undies today? She folded them on his bed. Perhaps she should go to Melbourne after all. Pack up her house and sell it, though talk was that she'd not get anything for it, such was the dismal state of the economy, especially house and land prices, and the way the banks were acting. Disgraceful. All these foreclosures and bankruptcies. So what point would there be to leave here and put herself in debt in Melbourne, where finding a decent house to suit her budget would be nigh on impossible, or worse, to burden her soon-to-be-married daughter with her company? One must be sensible. Then again... Oh, gracious me, I used to be so clear-headed. She left the room, thoughts spinning, heart heavy. Standing in the hall, She could hear a child crying somewhere outside, and she started towards it until she heard the soothing murmur of a man's voice, following the sobs. Jude was coming out of his brother's room.
Mrs. Hartman.
He shuffled into her path, a hand on the wall as he crept along. Her steps faltered. Her chest tightened. Seeing no signs of distress in him, she asked, "Are you quite well, Mr. Jones?"
I'm sore, but well as can be.
He had a few days' growth on his cheeks and chin, and salt and peppery it was too. She wondered, very fleetingly, what it might feel like to smooth her hand over it. She knew, of course she knew, from oh so long ago, what a man's bristly face felt like. But not Judah Jones's face. Her heart gave a little jump. Goodness me! She had to stop this. He'd made himself clear. And the only reason she was still here in this house was that his brother Ezekiel had asked her to stay while he was gone, for her own safety as much as anyone's. And really, that was a very sensible reason for her to stay. Besides that, Jude was an invalid at the moment, and there were 3 young children to be cared for.
Got me thinking. The boy crying out there,
he said, and seemed to be choosing his words carefully as he edged towards the back of the house. He shoved the door open for her, beckoned her to go ahead of him.
Let's have some tea.
In the bright but cool early morning, the sunshine pale blue, she waited until he was level with her and then walked at his pace to the cookhouse. Their silence was awkward as far as she was concerned. Well, she had nothing of interest to impart. Inside, she pulled out a chair and indicated he should sit. Removing a discarded hairbrush from the table, she thought to have Gracie come and put it away, which prompted her to ask, "Where are the children?" She remembered the cry from before. He sat carefully.
They're saying goodbye to Miss Goody. I'll be in directly. If they're not going to school, they have to do chores before they get their damper and jam for the day.
Ezekiel is lucky he could still send them to school, she commented, setting the half-filled kettle back on the stove. She checked the contents of the teapot and decided another brew could be eked from it.
He won't be able to for much longer,
Jude said.
Giff will have to work on the farm. Maybe on both our farms. Our brothers need to talk more.
It gave Lily pause to think of her own place again, of how hard it was just to find spare money to pay someone to help her when she needed it. But if she sold... She dismissed the thought. Don't think of it now.
You heard the boy cry, Mrs. Hartman.
His voice was low, hoarse. His big hand smoothed the tabletop as if it had a wrinkled cloth on it, and he seemed to be studying his progress.
It was the little lad, Jaunty. I was watching.
Lily glanced at him. Oh my. That wistful look on his face. Whatever is the poor man thinking? Perhaps missing his children. His girls, of course. Terrible thing. Terrible disease, diphtheria. She sighed inwardly. It wasn't her place to speak those thoughts. Many a time she'd been in trouble second-guessing what was on someone's mind. Who knew what he was really thinking? Upset for something, no doubt. She replied evenly. She gathered the remains of yesterday's damper and brushed the crumbs and the crusts into a bowl for the chickens. Finding the flour bag, she poured a good measure into another bowl, added water, and began to mix. Felt right. It was nice and easy in her hands, something to do.
Got me thinking.
Oh, for goodness sake, man, you already said... The kettle whistled. Scraping sticky dough from her hands, she wrapped her pinny around the handle and poured the water into the pot. Give it 5 minutes, she decided. Back to the damper, and it was coming together nicely. I wonder if Ezekiel has any dried fruit, she mused aloud. Hands still doughy, she turned back to the mantel, and as she did, She heard the chair scrape and Judah Jones was standing behind her. Without turning, she could feel the heat of him close to her back. She reached up for a tin on the shelf and his hand closed over hers.
Came back, thinking the time was right to move forward. Got me thinking how much I miss a family life. Reckon I could be a help here with these children, instead of pushing them away.
He took the tin from her hand, set it on the table with a firm thump, and picked a little dough from his hand.
Instead of pushing everyone away.
And you were a solitary man only yesterday. But she didn't dare say that aloud. Of course not. She turned, now so very close to Jude. She looked into those eyes that were always under a frown, always dark and enigmatic. Heat crept up her neck. It wasn't from the stove, and those burning flashes of heat other women talked of hadn't tormented her yet. So it only left one thing.
I said I was a solitary man. I am. I feel I have to be because my mind still takes me to dark days every so often. The ghosts will never be gone. But they come less now than before.
He wasn't so much taller, and yet it felt as if he towered over her.
I didn't finish saying, yesterday before you ran off.
I didn't run off. She gave him a look, sidled away from the stove and put her hands back into the dough. A light sweat broke out on her forehead, and she patted it off with her forearm, hoping nothing would likely drip into the damper mix.
And I know I sounded like I was keeping my distance, warning you off.
One way of putting it, and you succeeded. Perhaps he was still too much attached to his dear and departed family. Well, she couldn't blame him for that, but it would certainly not do her any good to be hankering after a man who was unreachable. Oh, make up your mind, Lily Hartman. She huffed out her determination and gazed at the bowl. She had a good dough, and another knead or two, and she could put it in a pan. Now, where was a pan?
I just didn't have the right words.
Jude reached under a bench close by and a pan clattered to the table.
When this is healed,
he said, pointing to his side.
I'll get back to my own place, get it built up again.
Good for you, she finally said, as she kneaded. A blush rushed over her face to the roots of her hair. She'd felt like this for Jude for years. Still, he had put her straight yesterday. No need for you to explain.
Then maybe with that done, I'll have something to offer you,
he said and stopped her hands working in the bowl.
But for now, I'd like it if we stepped out together.
His eyes searched hers. He moved closer.
Let me be proper about it and court you, Lily.
He pressed a hand over her wrist.
If I may call you Lily.
She stared. She took a deep breath and let it out. You've called me by my name before. Still, her feathers were ruffled from yesterday. However, I've a mind to sell up and go to Melbourne, Mr. Jones. Oh, and sounding petulant now. What on earth made her blurt that? She had thought of it, true, but really, so very fleetingly.
Damn me,
he said softly.
Not go, surely.
He shook his head a little, frowned as if worried all of a sudden.
Why would you think of doing that? Your farm, your friends are here. You know the place well.
He looked surprised. Did the man really have no idea? Oh, probably not. My time would be better spent elsewhere, meeting new people. My children are all there, not likely to return, and you yourself know how hard it is to keep a farm. She stopped short of saying what she most wanted to say, especially as I'm a woman and on my own. That was most certainly not appropriate to say here and now, but it was true. Still bemused, he looked at her.
But people look out for you here.
Do they? She supposed they did. And to date, all except the one person she hoped would look out for her. And yet, now, here he is, hoping to court her. Oh, my heart. Could she dare think?
Don't go. Don't sell,
he said, and pressed her wrist again.
We could work your place too. With Gif, as well as us old boys, and maybe even Nebo if he stops being the fool.
He looked as if something grand had just dawned on him. Oh, must be sensible. I need to get this in the cooker. She reached past him, grabbed the dough, and slapped it into the pan. He turned and opened the oven with the tamp iron. He took the pan and shoved it inside.
And you see, I'm good in the kitchen.
A very attractive attribute.
Thought that would impress.
He took one of her hands, rubbed off the excess dough. He brought it to his lips. So very forward, Mr. Jones. But the scratch of his beard stubble awoke her. She uncurled her fingers and let her hand rest on his cheek. Oh, yes, those bristles were wonderful against her palm, and the giddy tickle raced straight to her belly. She never thought she'd feel that again, that wanting, that anticipation. However, I am not a woman with whom to trifle, Judah Jones.
I know it, and I would not.
His gaze never wavered. He waited. A deep breath or two. And then her other hand came up, all by itself, and cupped his face. A light sparked in his eyes, and it so gladdened her heart. Because I've waited for you, she said. A strong arm slid around her, and despite her being acutely aware of her extra padding built up over the years, no longer the lithe girl, his easy warmth, his confidence was heartening. He looked earnest, open.
So don't be leaving now that I'm here,
he said, and his eyes glinted.
You'd never get to see the rest of my attributes.
He pressed his forehead on hers.
I'm too old not to speak my mind about what I want, what I need, Lily. And it's you.
Noises of the children playing in the yard, perhaps not doing their chores, the kettle puffing on the stove, the open pot of jam, and the empty dough bowl on a hard-working family kitchen table. These were the sounds and signs of a life she missed, echoes of a life filled with company and love. Her own children were distant now, disdainful. Still, how she loved them. But here, a man was holding her close. She would be wanted again, and useful, productive, and with a life worth living to the full, surrounded by the thing she most treasured. Family. But she'd waited too long not to guard her heart. She stared into those eyes, crinkled and bleary with years of life and love and loss. They were dear to her. She wanted her life again, not just the desperate filling of each day with simple routine to keep her alive. She wanted a new life, with him. But would he know what she needed to hear? His hands pressed over hers again, large and warm, eyes searching hers.
Grab that good while we can.
He took a breath.
I'm letting my ghosts rest.
Her breath caught. He had known. She touched her lips to his cheek, softly. So very forward yourself, Lily Hartman. I think your ghosts would be happy to rest, Judah.
I think they would.
This is the end of CD 8. The book continues on CD 9. CD 9. 38. Overhead, the sky had darkened. Roiling clouds, heavy and threatening, blocked out the sun. Every so often, great fat drops had fallen, but a deluge hadn't come. Elsa tightened the tie on her hat as Ezekiel clicked the reins again, urging Milo faster. "I have no brolly," he said, "and it looks like that could dump on us before we get much further. If it's a torrent, we'll have to go to the town. Going to Nebo's camp will be out of the question." "Why?" "The ground doesn't drain well here. There's talk of digging great gutters by the roads, along the fields, but it hasn't happened yet. If it's rained hard over this way, chances are it's boggy. I won't risk Milo getting stuck." Many animals perished if carts and coaches got bogged and couldn't be pulled out. She'd certainly not endanger any animal, but she didn't want to go to the town. "Could we turn around?" "We could, but we're much closer to Custerton than the farm. We'll head there." She tried again. "Surely we'd be fine on the track to the camp. It seems quite sturdy." He glanced at her. "It might be, but if it pours, and that's looking likely," he said, nodding towards the southeast and the wall of cloud, thick and grey, obscuring the horizon, "we won't even get that far. Town it is." He flicked the reins over Milo again, and the horse stepped up once more, Salty picking up his pace too. Ezekiel veered along to the right, onto a wider track, which Elsa assumed headed towards the township. She'd only seen faint twinkling lights when she'd ridden by it in the night not long ago, and now she had no real clue where she was. She'd wanted to get to Rosie as quickly as possible, but she'd have to wait. The thing to do now was to secure the satchel so nothing inside it got wet, most importantly her father's will. She tucked it back further under the seat and checked that it would be well sheltered if it did rain. She hoped so. A thought struck her. If they had to go to the township, would there be a solicitor there by chance? A visiting one at best. Thunder cracked close by, and Milo's ears twitched and flattened, and the cart lurched forward. "Hang on tight," Ezekiel said, and he let the horse have his head. "Only a mile or so to go." The skies opened, and the deluge hit them full force. Rain stung as it pelted, and soaked their clothes through in only minutes. Milo tugged harder as the road began to puddle and muddy under him. But the sludge was slowing him down, sucking at the wheels. As the buildings of the town came into view, Elsa believed that they might just make it in one piece. She let her breath go and prayed for the satchel to remain dry. She didn't dare retrieve it now. In front of them, pedestrians charged from the footpath across the slush and mire of the road to the opposite side, looking for shelter under verandas. Not a lot around, Elsa discovered when she chanced to look through the sheeting rain. It was pouring in rivulets off a hill that rose like a great sentry at the eastern end of the street. Ezekiel hauled Milo up at the Albion Hotel, a single-story solid brick building that Elsa hoped had rooms. She also hoped that Ezekiel Jones could pay for rooms. She had no money. Rosie had it. "Wait while I check inside," he shouted at her, the rain dripping down his face and running under his sodden shirt. He was off before she could answer. Good God. Stuck on the cart for how long? She should grab the satchel out from its hiding place, but her own clothes were wet through, weighty with water. That would not be a good idea. And she wouldn't be able to protect the contents from the bucketing rain. He bolted back outside. "Come on!" he shouted, and held out his arms for her. He swept her off the cart, a confident, powerful swing that made her feel that she was as light as air. But she could only hold on. No time to grab anything. Rain cascaded over her head, and she closed her mouth to stop sputtering water. Then he clambered inside the hotel with her. Shelter from the bombardment was swift relief. It was warm and dry, and close with the unmistakable ripe smell of hops. Loud male laughter roared through a doorway off to the side, so that would be the bar. Tobacco and firewood smoke mingled with the pungent, sour aroma of sweaty bodies and floated in around her. He set her down in the small foyer, checked that she rested easily against a wall, and slapped his sodden clothes.
Now for the things we need.
He turned for the door, dripping from his hat to his boots, and small puddles trailed him. "Mr. Jones, please get my satchel," she called after him. He pulled open the door, and the roar of the downpour was staggering. Long moments later, utterly soaked, he returned with a rifle, the crutches, and the satchel. A sigh of relief when she saw it tucked under his arm. She sagged back against the wall and smiled at him. "Thank you." She put it under the seat nearby, which stood by a raggedy-looking aspidistra. Sopping, she wasn't game to sit on the nicely upholstered chair for fear she'd ruin it. Ezekiel snatched off his hat, wrung it over the plant, and dropped it on the floor.
"They have rooms, and have given me a credit note."
He looked grim.
"This weather looks set in. There's no guarantee the roads will be safe for the cart even in a day or so, even if it stops raining."
"Should we have turned back for the farm after all?"
He snorted. "We wouldn't have made it. We'd be stuck out in this, in the open somewhere."
He pushed wet hair off his face and swiped water from his arms and chest. Great plops settled on the timber floor.
"I'll try to find cover for the cart and horses."
He leaned down and grabbed his hat.
"We'll be right."
Elsa wasn't so sure. She'd been days away from her sister. No idea when she'd see her next. Her only clothes were saturated. She had a broken bone in her foot, had no money, and she was in a hotel with Ezekiel Jones. Bursting from the barroom in a tumble, a big red-headed man with a sizable middle that hung out of his shirt was clutching another man around his neck. They'd chortled, drunk as lords, cackling about some joke. The redhead straightened up and wobbled his pink and ginger-furred belly in both hands. Then he caught sight of Ezekiel. Elsa caught her breath and shrank. She knew exactly who these men were. She tugged her hat rim around her ears.
"Hey, Jones,"
Redhead said, and shoved into the other man, who staggered back against the wall. Ezekiel was still swiping rainwater from his clothes. He looked up.
"Billy Watson, they let you back in here again."
Elsa smoothed her own clothes and tried not to attract attention, but she was on one foot, and crutches rested nearby. Surely that awful man would recognize her, or his friend might, the one who'd dragged her out from behind Pepin's hind legs. She lowered her head. Redhead wobbled closer.
"Funny bug, Ezekiel. Nobody keeps me out of a pub,"
he said. He threw a smirk at his mate and stared back at Ezekiel.
"Hey, heard your brother bailed up a coach like some flaming bushranger."
"Did you now?"
"Yeah, had some wild women with him. Decoys they was. Their cart was across the road and all. Coach had to stop for him. Here's how they got held up. Clever that Nebo, getting women to do his work for him."
Elsa squeezed her eyes shut and kept her hands on her dress. She hardly dared breathe. Glancing, she saw Ezekiel had stilled a moment. He'd cocked his head, as if considering what Watson had said.
"That's so. Never heard of either of my brothers bailing up any coaches."
He flicked a narrow glance in Elsa's direction.
"Come on. Nebo's done one years ago."
Ezekiel shook his head.
"Don't think so."
His mouth flattened. His hands flexed.
"Yeah, well."
Then Watson thumbed towards the bar.
"I was talking to a bloke about Nebo in there. Told him where he might be. Hiding out in that camp of his at 5 Mile. Got me good coin for it, too. He's real interested in you Jones boys. I might just go right back to him and earn me some more now I've seen you here."
He nodded, smirked again, his guts wobbling as he tried to stand upright. Ezekiel's face looked set as if carved in stone. Watson didn't notice. He nodded again, imparting more news.
He's the fella's been hunting Jude for killing his son. He reckons Nebo might have something what don't belong to him. As usual.
Elsa sucked in a breath and froze. Could Nebo have had something of George's after all? Oh, God. Rosie. Ezekiel's gaze nailed the drunk. Then he snaked out an arm and grabbed Watson by the collar.
It isn't my brothers he has to worry about,
he said between his teeth.
Jesus, he's killing me.
Bug-eyed, Watson gurgled.
Buffer, get that bloke.
A man exploded out of the bar. Stocky, with a grimace glinting gold, he head-butted Boffer in the doorway, sending him out cold and sliding down the wall. The man spun hard, barreled full-bodied into Watson, knocking Ezekiel flat on his back. The man flew out the door, into the driving rain.
That was him! That was the fella!
Watson shouted from the floor. Ezekiel shoved Watson off and scrambled to his feet. He bolted outside into the deluge. Watson fumbled around trying to stand up, and once back on his feet, spotted Elsa. He squinted at her.
Hey,
he said, and staggered towards her.
You, Gilly, I know you.
She shied away. She could smell his breath, and the rest of him. Worse than a fly-blown sheep. Boffer, awake, was holding his head. His nose was bleeding into his mouth as he crawled towards the door.
Let's go, Billy,
he said, his teeth red.
Look who it is, Boffer. Billy, come on. Zeke's on his way back.
Boffer spit blood as he dragged himself up the door jamb.
It's one of Nebo's doxies.
Watson leered at her as if he'd won a prize. He glanced at the crutches and then down at her feet.
It was you at the cart.
In spite of good sense, she screwed up her face and shouted, "You'd only know that if you were there!" And Watson understood her. She could see it on his face, even drunk as he was. He lurched and knocked her hat off.
Well, maybe my mate, the coach driver, can tell the troopers that I caught me his lady Bushranger all by accident.
Ezekiel crashed inside, lunged at Watson and grabbed him by the waistcoat, swinging the bulky redhead towards the door. Watson stumbled and dropped to the floor with a grunt. Ezekiel put a foot to his backside and rolled him outside and into the mud as if he was a sack of beans. He wheeled around to the man holding his own head, trying to stand.
You next, Boffer,
he growled, dripping with muddy water and breathing hard. Holding his nose as blood slid over his fingers, Boffer mumbled,
Not me, Zeke. I'm going. No trouble out of me.
On both legs, he wobbled past Ezekiel and staggered outside. Elsa propped herself against the wall with both hands to keep from falling. What a relief.
Tell me you didn't help Nebo bail up a coach.
Ezekiel's eyes were fiery red. He stormed towards her.
Tell me you haven't bloody lied the whole time.
She stormed right back, just under his chin. I haven't lied about a damn thing! She swatted at drips running from her hair to her chin. Don't you yell at me! She cried. I just heard that your brother might have something of George's after all, and my sister is out there with him. She finished, a finger in the air, done with polite, done with waiting. A man stuck his head out the bar door and shouted,
Hey, Zeke, I just got rid of 2 drunks making a noise. You got rooms? Take it up there.
Raucous laughter followed from the bar, and a sudden hot bloom burst in Elsa's cheeks. She glared at Ezekiel and watched as the fight flickered to nothing in his eyes before he turned away. He bent, picked up her crutches, and thrust them at her. He snatched the satchel from under the chair, then cradled the rifle.
This way,
he said, and he didn't wait for her as he stalked past the bar door. The laughter had drowned under the pounding rain on the roof. Behind Ezekiel, Elsa swung carefully along a short corridor, mindful of puddles forming on the floor as rain found its way inside in steady streams from above. When she caught up, Ezekiel was jiggling a key in a door and it swung open. He looked inside, then stood by so she could get past him. She'd expected only one single bed, but there was one big bed and a smaller one beside it. She flared.
"I'm not—" "I'll take that room there,"
he said, gruffly cutting her off. He swung open the door opposite, and 3 single beds were close together in the middle of the room.
"I'll bring a bowl and a pitcher of water. There's a chamber pot under the first bed."
He pointed at it, then nodded down the hallway.
"A privy is out that way."
He tossed the satchel onto one of the beds in her room.
"I'll see if I can get her some food."
He stopped and looked at her.
"Maybe some dry clothes from somewhere. And shelter for the horses and cart."
He turned to go. "Wait!" Elsa's face still flamed and her heart had begun to pound, but not because of their spat. The real enormity had dawned on her as she recalled Lily's description. They're capped in gold. As he turned back, she said, "That man with the gold teeth."
"He's the one I took to your brother's grave. The one who says he's Elsa Goody. The man we reckon killed George. The one who stabbed you."
He looked at his hands and back at her again.
"And now Watson has told him where Nebo is likely to be. He disappeared by the time I got outside."
She took in the slump of his shoulders, the resigned look on his face. "If he's gone to where Nebo is, Rosie is there, my sister—"
"What the hell is he after?"
Ezekiel cut in.
"What the hell does he think George had that was worth killing him for? That was worth trying to kill Jude? George had something. He must have."
His eyes were bleak, searching hers. Water dripped from his hair and slid down the bristly, dark cheeks, dropping to his neck and shirt. Beads trickled into the expanse of his chest, mingling the hair there, and disappeared. Rain roared down overhead. Now her fury had evaporated, Elsa was chilled to the bone, standing in drenched clothes. Her one boot was heavy and squelchy with water, and the bandage on her sore foot was soaked. Her toes felt numb, on both feet. "It's a tin," she said hoarsely. "A tin, with at least 30 sovereigns in it." She lifted a hand to wipe over her lips. Her fingers were biting cold. She licked the droplets off them. Her mouth was so dry. Water still dripped from her hat, and she snatched it off, letting it dangle by its tie around her neck.
30.
He stared at her for some moments, then looked at a leak starting in her ceiling.
"I'll find a bowl and a bucket. Clean water for drinking."
He handed her a key.
"Let only me back in."
He didn't wait for her to answer, just turned on his heels and pounded back towards the bar. The barman filled a pitcher of water and told Zeke where to get towels. He agreed to find a dry dress for Zeke's lady friend. Then he sent a boy out into the weather to stable Zeke's cart and horses.
"Not one of the tarts dresses either, Bernie,"
Zeke told him, flicking a glance at a couple of women entertaining the patrons, though any sort of dress would suit Elsa. She was the most effortlessly beautiful woman he had ever seen. Strong and natural in her disposition, he'd told her that, no airs and graces, just a normal, down-to-earth woman. Elsa out of any sort of dress would suit him too.
"What?"
The barman laughed.
"Might be they're the only ones that are dry today, mate. Hope the river don't flood, else there'll be nothing dry for months. 93 was bad enough, you remember,"
he said, and looked at the old water stains running on the wall beside him.
"Heaviest drop in 3 years today."
He nodded towards one of the women.
"I'll have Emily bring something along directly. She'll be finished soon, and I don't reckon she'll be in a hurry to leave in this lot."
He put a shot of rum in a cup and slid it across the bar. Zeke grabbed it and took a swallow. When he remembered how Elsa had looked after he accused her of lying, He had cause to shift uncomfortably on his seat. Those big green eyes and her spitfire temper. She'd been dripping wet, angry and glaring at him. Get your mind out of your pants, man. Right. 30 sovereigns in a tin. No wonder the bastard had killed for it, and had tried to kill Jude. He was sure Jude didn't have it and never had. Who'd been with the boy, other than Nebo, before he found him and brought him in? Nebo. Zeke thought hard, shook his head. Nebo wouldn't still be in the district if he'd found 30 sovereigns. He'd have gone, quick as snatching up a rum. Zeke went over the last conversation he'd had with him. There was no indication that his brother had had a stroke of that sort of luck. Zeke stared into the pannikin. All there'd been with the boy was the locket and those few buttons. No bloody 30 sovereigns in sight. 39. Jesus, glad I made it. Pete Southey shook off his oilskin and stepped into the main bar at the Glenelg Inn in Casterton. Others had crowded inside before him and the air was thick, all tobacco smoke. Blokes were yelling across the crowded room. Ale was spilled and rum slopped. Busy place. The bar counter was packed with men except for a corner on the other side. Only one fella sat there, nursing a glass filled to the brim. He didn't look happy. It was the only place to stand, and Pete angled his way over. He kept his coat close to him, and his hand in his pants pocket, feeling the warm coins there. He got to the vacant space, called over the din to the barman for a rum. He slapped a coin into the man's hand and took his change. The fella alongside was surly, barely even looked up. No matter, he didn't need conversation. Not yet, anyway. As soon as he'd had a drink, found something to eat, he'd check around for those Goody girls, see if they'd headed here like the Rabbitoh kid said. Well, he would if the bloody rain let up. It was only luck my horse didn't slide off the road into a fetlock coming into town. As it was, he had to tie up his poor nag out the back with others. There was little shelter around. If Miss Putney was here, he'd tell her about Frank. Come right out and say it, he reckoned. Miss Putney? Frank is dead. He'd tried out other ways, kept himself occupied with it getting over here, but he kept coming back to simple and to the point. Frank is dead. Old town back home weren't the same with the bakery shut. Miss Putney would take it over for sure when she got back, and have young Elsa help her out. Pete could run the farm, get a few trees in, get a vegetable garden going. The ladies like a good garden. Get a crop in maybe, this year if he was lucky, if he was smart. Some sort of crop anyhow. He'd figure it out learning from a few of the others. He'd never been a croppy before. Would be better to run sheep. Maybe dairy cows, yeah. He could see himself doing a fine job, having a fine time, if he got it right. He'd get Miss Elsa on side. He could see she was itching for him, playing that hard-to-get game. She'd see his way of thinking, and he'd have none of her independent lady thinking. He'd wear the pants. Of course, that other thing she'd done was just a mistake, messing up his tea that last day. Poor little lady would have been all sad, and her mind would have been turned upside down. Damn near poisoned a man, whatever she gave him instead of sugar. Can't have a woman all blithered in the head like that, allowed to vote like she wanted to do. No wonder everyone was against it. Government's gone damn stupid. Dunno what it's doing giving women the vote. He shook his head. He took a long gulp of rum, looked at the fella next to him and nodded. The man eyed him, nodded back, and took a long swallow of whatever was in his glass. Whiskey, maybe. Lucky bastard. No one dirt poor could get whiskey. Must be a rich local. Pete still had a bit of money left. Could buy another drink for himself. He signalled the barman, and he'd strike up a conversation. See what he could get out of the bloke standing all quiet-like beside him. Could be an interesting conversation with a rich fella. Never talked to a bloke with gold in his teeth before. 40. Elsa didn't know how long she'd been asleep. She hadn't believed it was possible to doze off with the rain still hammering above, but she had. And now the rain had stopped. The leak was still running and the chamber pot under it was catching most of the drips. Trying to rouse herself, she heard a knock at her door. She sat up, pushed off the covers, and swung her feet to the floor. She'd stripped down to nothing earlier, pulled her hair out of the tie, and used a sheet from the other bed to dry herself off, then had slipped under the covers of the big bed to warm up. Her clothes hung over the other bed's rail, and small puddles had formed under the hems. Her dress was still heavy with water. Her chemise was just a little more than damp. Still nowhere near dry enough to wear. Her ruined stockings were almost dry, but they would hardly help, and she wondered what to wear to answer the door.
Elsa, are you in there?
Ezekiel's voice was urgent through the door. I'm coming. I just have to... I won't be a moment. Wrapping the thin bedsheet around her and tucking it secure, she draped a light, short blanket over her shoulders. Something smelled a bit mouldy, but it was bearable. Then she tried her weight on her sore foot. It wasn't too bad, and hobbled to the door, unlocking it and pulling it open. It looked like shock on his face when he stared at her. "What is it?" she cried, now fully alert. She was perfectly decent, she knew, but her hair was all over the place. Would that have shocked him? Surely not.
Nothing.
He gathered himself, shook his head.
I found this for you.
He held up a light gown in an amber-coloured fabric.
I left the water pitcher here before. And a bucket,
he said, and pointed at the foot of the door.
I knocked, but I couldn't get you to answer.
Still he stared. Then,
here, I'll bring it all in.
She hopped aside and he brushed past, laying the dress on the bed. He was only in his shirt and his trousers. His feet were bare. Looked like he'd tried to dry off too. He went back to the door and picked up the pitcher and bowl, set it on the dresser. He emptied water from the chamber pot into the large bucket.
Towels are somewhere. I think there's a bathroom down the hall a bit.
He looked as if unsure of what to do, then bemused, turned to go. When will we leave here? She asked, one hand clutching the sheet around her, the other holding the blanket closed over her chest.
Tomorrow, if the rain stays away. The river hasn't come up. It might not, but if it does, we'll be here for a while.
He headed for the door again, seemed to be in a hurry.
The cook will have a couple of bowls of mutton stew and potatoes for us. Will that do?
Her mouth watered immediately. Yes, I'll dress and come down.
No. Too many men in the bar. And they've spilled into the dining room. It's crowded.
He waited, and only once met her gaze. Then I'll eat here, she said, and her mouth flattened. She was to be locked in a room while he was off and had a fine old time in the bar. Still he hesitated, but then said,
I'll be back directly, with the food.
And he marched out. Sighing, she shut the door and shuffled to the bed, eyeing the dress he'd left for her. Wouldn't make sense to put it on now that she was going to be in the room all night. She might as well stay as she was. Even sleep without unders to give all her clothes a chance to dry more. The smalls that were still in the satchel were damp. The will had been dry, thankfully, and there was nothing worse than that stale water smell on clothes, the smell of things not dried properly, but worn nevertheless. She'd stay in the blanket and sheet, dry and warm. She sat on the bed and tried to wrangle her hair. The blanket slipped from her shoulders and the sheet drooped. She adjusted them and tried again with her hair. Drying, it was becoming voluminous, and not for the first time she thought about lopping it off. George had done her a favour all those years ago. She bit her lip. If she cut it off, would Ezekiel ever put his hands in it again? It would grow, of course. Heat crept through her chest as she remembered him plaiting her hair, the gentle tugs on her scalp as he worked, his warm fingers brushing her back. Would there ever be a chance he'd do that again? He did it for his child because she had no mother to do it. He did her own hair because Gracie insisted on it. Would he do it for a wife? Such an intimate act, it seemed to Elsa. Personal, innocent, yet charged with something she couldn't name, didn't know how to name. Wife? She gave a little huff and tried to quell the glow inside. No lopping off my hair.
Elsa?
His voice was muffled at the door. Startled, she adjusted the sheet and, clutching the blanket, opened the door. A tantalizing waft met her. She looked down. Oh, that smells wonderful. In his hands were 2 bowls of steaming, aromatic stew with a dumpling atop each. She couldn't take them, otherwise she'd lose her clothes. She pointed at the dresser with an elbow. But I couldn't eat all that, she said.
I thought to eat here with you, for company,
he said, carefully placing the bowls. He took 2 spoons out of a pocket.
That is, I'll eat here if you've no objection. We'll leave the door open.
He looked as if he was waiting for her to tell him what to do. The mutton stew called her, and her stomach groaned a little in response. That's a fine arrangement.
Good.
He seemed pleased with that and stood there. I must change in order to eat in company.
Certainly.
He seemed pleased with that too, and with a deep breath, headed for the door.
I'll wait across the hall.
Seemed he couldn't get out fast enough, and he shut the door with a loud click. First, she swiped a finger through some gravy and took a quick bite of dumpling. Then Elsa shed the blanket and sheets and pulled on the dress. She didn't need to fumble with too many buttons. It was a little big in the bodice. Soft, well worn, but it would do. It smelled of lavender and was only a bit musty. But she was grateful to whomever had supplied it. She dipped her finger in the gravy again. Perhaps she could eat both bowls after all. It smelled so delicious. Pulling open the door, she could see directly into his room. He sat on the end of a bed, waiting, his dark head bowed, his hands laced between his knees. "Come in," she called, as he stood and walked towards her. She thought suddenly that perhaps she'd never seen anything better in all her life. Until he smiled. Then she was absolutely sure she'd never seen anything better. Her belly swooped as she met his glance. What would it feel like to see that face every day for the rest of my life? She cast her eyes down and blinked. How can I be thinking that? Pa just gone? George gone? There's something the matter with me. Oh, for goodness sake, the world is all topsy-turvy. Pa would want a good man for me. George would laugh out loud. She could almost hear him. Standing aside, she left the door ajar as he strode past her to pick up a bowl and spoon. He waited until she'd hobbled to a bed and sat, before handing them to her.
I'm so hungry. I could eat my poor horse and yours,
he said. Taking his bowl, he sat on the edge of the bed opposite and spooned a large scoop into his mouth. Elsa glanced at the open doorway. Noises from the bar threaded their way along the hall, but it wasn't too bad. She tucked in, mutton stew bursting onto her taste buds.
I want you to know,
he said between mouthfuls,
Nebo would never hurt your sister. Never.
She lifted a shoulder. I know nothing about you, or your brothers. Mr. Judah was very quiet. For good reason, of course. Mr. Nebo was different. You seem a decent man. She felt heat creep again. It was the look on his face when he'd glanced up. "You all seem decent men." He chewed, watching her.
"I know nothing of you, or your sister."
He spooned another mouthful.
"Or your family. George was in no state to befriend anyone."
She ate more before answering. No point being hungry. "There were 5 of us, with George gone, and our older brothers long gone. There's only my sister and me. Rosie left her husband recently." Elsa looked away, then decided it was not for her to be worried what he thought of that. She's unsure she should be ashamed of herself or happy for herself. She wants to be happy. "I was a farmer, as I told you. I intend to go back. But perhaps I mightn't be able to go back to the farm. Rosie's husband stands to inherit, or at least administer. We won't know until the will is formally read. But we do know Frank is not in favour of independent women. And I certainly doubt he'd look kindly on a woman who's left him, or look kindly on her sister." Ezekiel waved his spoon.
"I hear there are many independent women in South Australia, and all women there are about to cast a vote for the first time. Second in the world only to New Zealand women. You see, I read too."
She let the remark pass her by. "And I'm to be one of them. The ballot is set for the 25th of April, and I will be there in robe for Election Day no matter what."
"Even if you don't find that tin of sovereigns?"
Was he teasing her? Her chin came up. "I'll drive myself to get back there, with or without the tin."
"Is that right? By yourself? Or with your sister?"
He wrangled meat from between his teeth with a fingernail. Elsa let a little breath huff out. "I think she might not want to return." She set her bowl on her lap and stared into it.
"Ah, a runaway. So, both Lady Bushrangers then?"
"By accident," she cried, looking at him. "A ridiculous incident. Our cart was ahead, and the coach came roaring up behind us. There was no space on the road to overtake us or time to stop, and then that big fat redhead jumped out on the road on his horse. I'd been thrown onto the brace poles, and my horse had just stomped on my foot." She thrust out the bruised foot, and when Ezekiel glanced down, she quickly withdrew it. "Boffer, the other man, grabbed me and threw me off the road, luckily, else I could have been killed. It was only luck that no one was killed." Everyone knew stories of horrific coach accidents. Men, women, children and horses killed outright or maimed terribly, only to die agonizing deaths by the side of the road. "Then they bailed up the coach," she went on, "and that Watson man yelled that he was Nebo Jones, and that Rosie and I were his accomplices. The driver had said he'd remember me, and that redhead idiot thought it was a huge joke and had fun with it. Then they took off."
"And Nebo was where?"
"Not far away." She ate some more, then set the bowl aside. That seemed to be Ezekiel's thinking sound.
"That'd be Nebo,"
he said, a wry twist on his mouth. He reached over, took her plate and spoon, and set them on the dresser. He poured 2 cups of water from the pitcher, handed her one, and sat down again. "Why do you 3 have such unusual names?" she asked. Ezekiel gave a laugh.
"Not mine, or Jude's so much, but Nebo's are certainly unusual. My mother, Mary Brown, married my father, John Jones. Seems she didn't want plain names for her boys. They're all old biblical names. Years ago, I could have told you chapter and verse where to find them. Not now."
He took a long draught of water.
"Tell me about your farm."
His gaze was so intense, it was as if he'd asked her something else completely. Flustered, she took a moment. A small holding my father secured before the land grabbers came in. Back then, I think in the 60s. Land agents and the big pastoralists would make sure to run the price of land up at the auctions. Smaller farmers lost out.
Sounds the same everywhere, even still,
he said. Elsa nodded. My father always said things never change much. Just a bid. They had to put down a 20% deposit, the balance due within a month. Anyone with more money, a pastoralist for instance, could bid over the price and win at the auction. Pa was lucky early on, and grateful he'd had at least that chance, so he never bid again for another piece. He couldn't afford to. She lifted a shoulder, but it's all we have. And while it's owned outright, it's not earning anything now. I'm not allowed to secure a loan in order to build it up, even if I did inherit.
And your brother-in-law?
She glanced at the satchel, emptied of its contents, and at the will that lay propped beside it, drying out. He mightn't want it at all now, especially if Rosie doesn't return.
Why wouldn't she return? It'd be hard finding her way alone in the world. Almost impossible if she wishes to live reasonably well. She'll have to change her mind.
Elsa rankled. She knows how hard it'd be. We all do. She won't change her mind. Won't suffer going back to him. Warming again under that dark-eyed, intense stare, Elsa couldn't help but remember the looks that passed between Rosie and Nebo. Remembering what Rosie had said to her about Nebo, she said, I think my sister believes she's found someone else. She is very firm in her convictions, always has been. His eyebrows rose.
And who might the lucky man be? I doubt he'd be in your hometown, would he?
Of course not. The scandal of it. Elsa frowned. Your brother. She couldn't look at him, but she heard his little laugh of surprise. Yes, she could understand that reaction. She remembered that Rosie had inferred dislike for what goes on between a man and a woman in private, and then she'd seemed to make a complete about-face on that same subject. Surprise? Oh, yes.
Nebo,
he said, astounded.
That amazes me. How? Had they met before? Somehow, somewhere?
Elsa did look at him then. He was waiting for an answer, surprise still on his face. They met only after the hold-up.
A few days ago.
Elsa reddened. He need not be so sceptical. It was about as long as it had taken her to become enthralled by him, Ezekiel Jones. Clearly, not the done thing, this speedy developing of emotion, and clearly, Ezekiel didn't feel the same about her. His reaction just now showed he couldn't believe it. Her heart thundered for a different reason. Thank heavens she hadn't let her feelings show. Nevertheless, she's quite taken with him.
And did my brother appear to, feel the same?
She nodded.
Well,
he said, and laced his hands on his knees, not far from her as she sat on the bed.
That would impact on your life, wouldn't it?
Of course, but things are so unknown, aren't they? I'm trying not to think too far ahead.
Except for insisting on returning to your father's farm to front your brother-in-law. And a vote.
She heard the note of criticism, but ignored it. Voting is only 5 weeks or so away. Not a lot of time to endure whatever the consequences of Frank's decision.
It's a long time if you have nowhere to live,
he said sharply. There'll be a bit of time after the will is read, won't there? I only need a little time to gather myself. I wouldn't be put out straight away, would I? He only lifted a shoulder to show his doubt. She flustered. I'm sure a direction will emerge, she said, hoping she sounded strong. But her current plan was pathetic, and without substance. It was hardly a plan. It was just all she had. She'd have to find somewhere to live, find work to provide a living. She wasn't sure she'd even be allowed to keep Pepin, or the cart. Her chest felt tight. She most certainly had to come up with something. For me, right now, There is nothing more important than that vote, she said firmly. What happens with the farm is out of my control. It's secondary.
How can that be if it's at least a roof over your head?
He sounded incredulous now.
Think about that.
I have thought about it, she cried, and that was the truth of it. Even if Frank were to maintain the farm, even if he did allow me to live there, I couldn't stay knowing Rosie was elsewhere.
So going back is hardly an option, really.
His mouth set. Elsa took a moment. I have to go back. I can't leave Robe or stay away with nothing. She knew that much for sure. I'll find a place and work. People know me there. I'll be all right. He studied his hands, back and front, in considered silence. He was very fine to look at. The dark and wavy hair, a lock falling forward. Such a handsome face, with its strong jaw and searching eyes. That slight frown, the tilt of his head. If only. If only they'd known each other well enough to meet again, to explore the feeling she knew was between them. How to say she wanted the opportunity to see him again, without making some awkward mistake. The noise from the bar receded as rain began to fall. Then a huge downpour dropped out of the sky and crashed onto the roof. Just as suddenly, it stopped. Collective male voices groaned, and then laughter began again.
Maybe you'll find that tin,
Ezekiel said, still concentrating on his hands. She snapped out of impossible dreams. I have no illusions about it. After what you've told me, I doubt George even had it with him. Her thoughts went to the man in the hotel with the gold in his teeth. I hope that terrible man believes it too. I never want to see him again. He was quiet for some moments, then cleared his throat.
Miss Goody, whatever happens,
he began,
until you're on your way back to Rope, I'll ensure to the best of my ability that you come to no harm.
He took a breath.
For now, you might need your foot rebandaged. I'll ask the publican to send a woman to help.
He got to his feet. Elsa stared at him as he stood. No, she said more sharply than she'd intended, and struggled to get to her feet. His hand shot out and gripped her elbow as she steadied. My foot is much better. Perhaps not quite ready for full weight on it, or riding, but it is better. Hardly painful at all. She took a step to show him, but she faltered. It felt sore. He hesitated before he let her go.
I should have insisted you take more time to heal at my place.
He gave her a lopsided smile.
God knows, my kids would have loved you to stay longer.
Words rushed out. If I can, I'd like to visit again, when all this is over. Reaching for his hand as it slid from her elbow, she was intent only on words that would not be stopped, words that were coming from her heart. I'm very much taken by your children, and their father. Oh, Lord, she'd said it. His warm gaze, which had been on her hand in his, lifted to her face. Oh, my dear heavens, could he see what's written there, plain as day? And by the looks of him, good God, Elsa, you've just said something so wrong. 41. Zeke stared down at those serious and luminous green eyes, stared at her wild hair, its joyous spirals of dark honey-coloured waves waiting to tumble in his hands once again. It framed her face, a face he was desperate to hold against his. His heart leapt, and he itched to grab her up and press his mouth against her throat. And she looked very much as if she wanted it too. His cock had stirred. Christ, he needed to be careful. He dropped her hand as if it were molten. She blinked. I beg your pardon. I've said the wrong thing. He let out his breath.
Not at all, Miss Goody. I'd enjoy it if you would return to us. To visit.
He qualified, to be proper.
I know the children would enjoy it too.
He tried a smile, and that didn't work. Jesus, what to do here? He'd been thinking about how he could stop her leaving altogether, and failing that, how to see her again if she left, where she might go if Robe was no longer for her. Now she was offering. Please, call me Elsa, she said, and her chest rose and fell. He watched a little beat at the base of her throat. He wanted to touch it, put his finger on it.
I'm flattered.
Lame, you idiot. Lame. The way she just stood there. She had to stop looking at him like that. He knew she was waiting for him. He looked to the door. Open door. He was safe. Fool. She was safe. He wanted to toss her on the bed, slide his hand over a velvety, firm little breast, and after, down those strong, lean legs he knew were hidden by her dress. More than that, he knew it deep inside that he wanted to care for her, love her, have her by his side. He'd known it from the first moment he laid eyes on her. How can that be? Too soon. Too soon. Flattered. A fierce blush coloured her face. Oh, I see. It was forward. I'm sorry. I'm well known to be forthright. My father always told me that. I had to be that way, you see, growing up with boisterous older brothers, and then because of all the no-hopers that arrived at the door, I had to be very clear and plain-spoken. My father began to see it was probably a necessity after all. She was talking too fast, rattling, and her hand appeared to be waving her words away. Don't be alarmed, it's my nature. I meant only to—
I'm not alarmed by your nature.
He stood rigid.
It's too quick. This feeling between us is too strong to make light of it, or make decisions that might one day be regretted. We don't know each other.
He stepped back. He had to. She was delivering herself, and he wasn't ready. Not like this. Not without thought for the future. He wouldn't just take her and let her leave.
I don't want you to make a mistake.
Me? She looked bewildered, surprised. I'm sure of my feelings. Her gaze was warm and welcoming, her small smile tentative. She was an open book, no guile, but he sensed hesitation.
The feelings are strong. It's true. But being quick, they might be without depth. It takes time to be sure.
Damn it, wrong way to say it. The smile faltered. My feelings are not without depth.
I meant, I won't take advantage and jeopardize our friendship.
You wouldn't be taking advantage. I have my own mind, she said, her tone clipped, the smile now empty, taut. But thank you for your considerations. Please close the door on your way out.
Elsa,
he began. Just let me know when I need to be ready tomorrow. He dug his own hole. He set his mouth.
If it hasn't rained through the night, we'll leave at dawn.
Good, she nodded. Good night. He held on to his temper. Dismissed, he strode out the door and yanked it shut behind him. 42. Elsa wasn't stupid. No matter how much she wanted to pull open the door and clump down the hall on these ridiculous crutches, leave this awful pub, find Salty, and disappear, she knew she wouldn't. She would not put herself in danger, or the horse, just because she was exploding with embarrassment and more embarrassment, waves and waves of it. She'd let the man know that she'd jump all over him like some wanton baggage. She was trying to plait her unruly hair. The bloody stuff would not be contained, no matter how she tried. Her hands were shaking too much. Now her arms were tired. For goodness sake! Frustrated, she jerked a handful high on her head until it hurt. But was she stupid? She barely knew what she'd have done with him if he had given in. Given in? Oh, don't fool yourself, Elsa Goody. The man had been staunch. She'd ruined it. Forthright, oh yes, a forthright idiot. Her insides had been all warm and whooshy, and it certainly hadn't felt like it would have been a duty to be endured. Thank you for nothing, Rosie. All she wanted was to feel those arms around her, feel his face slide down her neck, and would those bristles scratch? What else would she feel? What else could she feel? She'd never been there before. He had been a gentleman, and it was true. They didn't know each other. But they did. She knew him well enough. She knew him in her heart, had known him so well since she'd read his letter that had carried the awful news about George. She'd been drawn to Ezekiel, and he hadn't disappointed. He was a kind man, a family man. His children were loved, his brothers were loved. She would be loved. She knew it. Did she dare think it? Did she dare think that they might become close, much closer, and that she would become his wife? It takes time to be sure. She was sure, but he was being honourable, so honourable, and she had embarrassed herself. You fool, Elsa! Fool! What to do, how to keep face in the morning. The night would be long. It was barely dusk now, with only her self-pitying whimpers to keep her company. She started to pace, but only limped along. Her foot wasn't too bad. Perhaps she should strap it again. The bone would have hardly healed at all, not least enough to stay strong, if she were to be rash, if she were to go galloping off on a horse like she'd sworn to herself that she would not. But she was about to do something. She could feel it. It drove her. She needed to impress upon him that she was a serious person and not taken lightly by whims of nature that were frivolous or glib. Her feelings already had depth. He'd be unsuspecting, the poor man. He'd answer the door, and she'd just rush in and he wouldn't be able to resist and she would have no care in the world. And he hadn't said no to her. Not exactly. Would he think it rash? Do I care? I should have a care. I'm not married to him. He has no obligation to me. He hasn't said yes, either. Had he only been polite, trying to discourage her? She held her head. So confusing. I am sensible, Elsa. Usually. She slumped. Oh, that delicate, teasing, intense craving down deep inside wouldn't let go. The ache was physical. That feeling of needing something. Needing him. She spun awkwardly, limped full of determination to the door and wrenched it open. She crossed the hall to stand at his door. I know my feelings. She hadn't the chance to knock before he pulled it open. His hat was on his head, the rifle was in his hand, and boots were on his feet. Oh no, he's going somewhere. Breath shot out of her. I was just about to knock. She swiped wayward tendrils from her face. Should have tied it. Should have at least looked sensible, not like some mad street woman. She put both hands on her head.
I can see that.
He smiled a crooked smile.
Do you need your hair tied?
There was an unusual gleam in his eye. No. Short and to the point. I came to say that I know my own self, and my own depth of feeling. I don't make light.
I'm sorry. I never meant it to sound like that.
His mouth was set, his gaze on her. Oh. He took a step closer.
I made a mistake earlier.
he said softly.
I misspoke what I meant.
He reached out to slide a lock of hair from her face. You didn't listen properly. Her face was flaming. Elsa had passed her own point of no return. Nor are you now. He tilted his head.
I did listen. I am listening. But if we take this step, we need to address going forward beyond it.
Oh, yes. To mutual terms, perhaps. For goodness sake, Elsa, you have to have terms before you demand them. Nevertheless, she took a step closer.
Mutual terms,
he said, and gave a breath of laugh.
And consent. Open and honest. I want you,
he said, and slipped a hand behind her neck, tugging on her hair and drawing her close.
Is this presumptuous?
No. Her heart lifted. Her lips felt lush, and her belly was whooshy again. But the rifle... She pointed at it. Where are you going out?
Only across the hall to knock on your door. It might as well be by my side. There are dangerous people about.
A deep breath. Consent. I want you to be with me tonight.
Sure.
She nodded. He nudged her back to her room, a hand on her hip. When he closed the door and turned the key, he set down the gun, threw off his hat and toed off his boots. He took her face in his hands. So close she could feel his mouth, and yet it hadn't touched her. He smelled of soap. At some time he'd washed. She gripped his wrists and hung on, and he swayed with her as if they were dancing. He dipped, and his nose touched hers briefly, but his mouth did not. He held her still, away from him, his gaze roving until it settled on her mouth.
I meant consent, as well, to be my wife.
She breathed short and sharp. So soon? She hardly expected that. Are you sure? She almost backed away. You said it was too quick. You said...
I'm sure.
He insisted, and angled her face to see her mouth, to trace a finger over her lips.
I want you. I want a wife. You, as my wife.
He said, his eyes on hers.
And if we do this, here tonight, marriage will protect you. I'll protect you, as your husband.
A baby. He meant if she was to have a baby because of tonight. Something deep inside tingled, and sparks flew through her belly, into her breasts. But still, if she was to become a wife, I must vote. Eyes wide, he said,
You can think of the vote, now.
She laughed a little at herself. I must. She took a breath as his arm slid around her waist, drawing her closer. It's so important to me to be a part of it, to have a say as a person.
And you will, whenever you need to. That's my promise to you, here and now.
He held her fast.
Will you marry me?
His lips brushed hers, but still he held back. She needed his mouth on hers again, but then it was pressed to her throat, and, oh yes, the bristles scratched and zinged, and delicious need fluttered when his chin scraped her neck. She shouldn't be thinking, but thoughts were twirling. What about your family?
You don't think they'd be happy? Marry me,
he whispered, voice rough, his mouth on her ear. The tip of his tongue slid to her nape. I will, whenever we're ready. He paused and murmured on her neck. Elsa couldn't make out the words. Instantly worried, she cried, What? What? And pulled away.
I said, thank Christ for that. We have mutual terms.
They slow shuffled to the big bed. Her hands splayed over strong, densely muscled forearms. The bed base pressed behind her knees. He dropped his hands low on her hips, and the sweet pressure of his thighs against her was driving her mad. This was pleasure. To be endured, yes, happily and greedily. Hands on her backside, he pulled her closer. The hard line of him sat rigid between her legs, through the light fabric of the dress, and a wave of longing irresistibly bloomed inside, left her without breath. He touched the buttons at the back of her neck and stopped.
May I help you?
She nodded, though I'll hardly need it. He sucked in a breath, gripped her dress at her hips. As she swung her arms high over her head, the dress came off and he dropped it on the floor. Brushing her fallen hair from her face, he stood a moment, staring at her. He rested a finger between her breasts, then lazily traced each nipple. Oh my, how to endure a heaven such as this? He took the weight of each breast in his hands and bent to suck and nip and lick. Mad swirls of delightful torment streaked their way to her centre, little pulses which sent her ragged. I cannot stand up any longer, she breathed, hands on his shoulders, fingers digging in. He tugged off his shirt, undid his belt, dropped his pants, and stepped out of them. She gazed from the broad patch of dark hair across his chest. She just had to put a hand on the solid expanse, and down to the surprise spring of his penis, warm and smooth as her hand closed around it. Arms scooped her up and laid her down, and he slid alongside her on the bed. He kissed her, his mouth long and slow over hers, languid, inviting, teasing. His hand flattened on her belly, near her secret place that tingled with want and warmth. Fingers swirled in the hair there, played with it, brushed softly, rhythmically, lower until he found her cleft. He stroked long and sleek until she writhed, lifting her hips for him. His fingers slipped inside. His thumb, wet and warm, glided silkily over the tiny nub, until her low, breathless cry of wonder escaped, and exquisite, rolling waves of pleasure rocked over and over her. Pressed against his hand, at each peak she cried into his chest, and when she could stand it no longer, she stopped him. No more, she breathed. You. I need you. He lifted her over him and drove deep. She moved with his rhythm, under his control, then he tensed, and the muscles in his arms bunched as he held her. She clung on, his gaze fierce. He let himself go, spent hard with a thrust and a lingering shudder as her hips met his. Then, with gradually measured breaths, he gathered her down to him. Wrapped in his big arms, she thought that it was all a wonder, a superb, heady wonder. Is it always like this? She asked into his neck, pressing her mouth here and there.
Oh, that'd be a beautiful thing,
he answered, his voice a murmur.
But if so, I might not survive to old age.
43. Elsa woke long before him and rested her head on his warm chest. She listened for sounds of the outside world above the strong, steady beat of his heart. Daylight was only a hint above the curtain over the window. She should rouse herself and dress. She could hear that others had risen from their beds and were going about their business at the start of the day. Although eager to get going, She couldn't fight the urge to slide her hand down the trail of hair that would lead to.
As much as I wish it, my love, we shouldn't linger. We must make tracks.
He held her hand fast before it reached him.
I fear I have created a monster.
You have, she said, but a monster who's also keen to get going. The night's many delights had tantalized into the small hours. She should have been satisfied. Resisting another touch, and sighing, she sat up and stretched. At that, he groaned and rolled over, swung his feet to the floor.
I'll bring the horses and cart to the front,
he said, and dressed swiftly. He pulled on his boots and donned his hat, bent and planted a hard kiss on her mouth, then gently tugged her thick plait that had survived the night. He'd fashioned it late, and after bathing, they'd slept.
No more than 10 minutes,
he said, and he was gone, rifle in his grip. She used the chamber pot, washed again in cold water, shrugged into the dress, and pulled on her one boot. She strapped her sore foot quickly, inexpertly, but better than no strapping at all. With the satchel slung over her shoulder, she picked up the crutches and followed him. Clumping down the hall, she was glad she'd become used to Gift's sturdy sticks, but hoped that soon she wouldn't need them. As she neared the bar door, she realized her chin felt a little tender and wondered if it had been pinked up by the bristles of his beard. Head down. Sure her face was aglow, she smiled a secret smile and made her way outside. 44.
That's her.
Peter Southey told the other two, his voice a rough whisper as he peered over the rump of his horse. Elsa Goody had emerged from the Albion Hotel. He was glad to find her. He wanted to go right there. She was on crutches, for God's sake. But he'd been told to keep out of sight. For her own benefit, the man with the gold teeth had added. Jesus. Lucky he'd befriended the surly stranger in the bar the night before. Seemed he'd heard about Elsa and Miss Putney, and that they'd been taken by bushrangers. Watson, who stood beside him now, had told him that they were dangerous blokes, a band of brothers who roamed the place, causing trouble. The fat redhead stank of last night's grog. Must have had a skinful. He looked as if he'd been dragged backwards over a bullock track.
Yeah, that's her, Mr. Curtis.
Watson turned to the man, who nodded. That's what started the ball rolling last night. The name of the fellow with the gold teeth. After a rum or two, Pete had mentioned that he had to find the Goody sisters from Robe. Heard they'd come this way looking for their brother's grave. The man had looked real interested and introduced himself. Dropped the grumpy attitude quick smart. Funny that Elsa's pa was named Curtis too, Pete had remarked. Mr. Curtis had laughed a bit at that, and said he'd be happy to help find the women. Pete watched the cart pull round the corner, a spare horse tied at the back, and park at the hotel's front door. The fella driving didn't look familiar, but when he jumped down and helped Miss Goody onto the coach, Pete felt a punch slam into his guts. The man had swooped her up, and laughing, had sat her on the seat of the cart, the crutches she'd used dropping to the ground. She'd put her hand on his cheek. Jesus, Miss Elsa, what's that all about? The crutches were thrown in the bag, a bag removed from around Miss Elsa's shoulders and shoved under the seat. And then the man climbed aboard and gee-upped the horse. He must have been in a hurry. They'd taken off quick enough. Mr. Curtis grunted.
Where are they going?
He asked as the cart headed out.
Need to follow them a ways,
Watson said, his stink breath flying over Pete's shoulder.
They could head south, going to Mount Gambier. Or they could take a turn off, going west to Panola. Nebo's camp is off the Mount Road. There's a track goes in at about the half-mile mark. Tracks all over the place in there, but I reckon I can find which one.
Curtis nodded.
Stay here, Mr. Southey. We'll bring our horses and then follow at a reasonable distance. You done this before, Mr. Curtis?
Pete asked him.
You're a lawman. Can't say too much, Mr. Southey. I just know how to find what I'm looking for.
This is the end of CD 9. The book continues on CD 10.